traditional owners of the land and paying my respects to their elders, both past and present, and by recording apologies from Councillors Porteous, Iskander and Drury. I believe everybody else is in attendance. Will someone move that those apologies be accepted? Moved by Councillor Passes, seconded by Councillor Hesse. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. For the benefit of the citizens in the gallery tonight, we'll just notify you that these proceedings are broadcast onto YouTube and recorded there for posterity so that you're aware of the nature of your comments being in the public domain. And I'll ask everyone, I'll ask all councillors whether there are any disclosures of interest tonight. Councillor Rosidi.
No significant, or I think it's item 5 about the netball courts.
Councillor Rosidi is declaring a non-significant, non-pecuniary interest for item 5. Any other disclosures, councillors? Councillor York, are you standing up to give me a disclosure? No? Rightio. Councillor Kiat? I'll call the meeting to order. As Councillor Kiat will be aware, disclosures are a matter for each individual councillor. I'll move that Councillor Rosidi's disclosure will be accepted. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Passis. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Could I ask everyone to please stand for a moment of quiet contemplation? Thank you. Please be seated.
Following up on that, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes?
I wondered if it wouldn't be too much about Ian or the General Manager to contact the Office of Local Government, because I don't believe Councillor Rosidi should distance herself from this issue. These people in the street, whether for or against, are her constituents.
Okay. Well, I believe the matter's closed.
But could we get some clarification on that? Because I'm pretty sure we've made mistakes on this before.
Okay. Well, how about we allow the officers to take that on notice and to liaise with Councillor Rosidi about that?
Okay.
Thank you. Councillors, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the 23rd of July. Is there any clarifications or corrections to those minutes? If not, will someone move their adoption? Moved by Councillor Stamoulis, seconded by myself. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Item 7 tonight is the public forum, where we'll be hearing from all registered speakers. Is that normally before mayoral minutes? Okay, we'll put them after, that's fine. So tonight we have 4 items for which there are registered speakers. The mayoral minute regarding Tempe Reserve, there's 1 speaker for that. Item 5 regarding the Hawthorn Parade netball courts, there's 2 registered speakers for that. Item 7, Tillman Park, Unwins Bridge Road pedestrian crossing, there's 1 registered speaker for that. And for item 8, notice of motion, heritage conservation areas in Lilyfield. Now we've got 4 registered speakers all in support of that recommendation. The Code of Meeting Practice only allows for 3 speakers in support and 3 speakers against each motion from the gallery. So I'm going to ask Anne-Therese, Gloria, Louise and Gary in the intervening period while we're hearing from the other speakers to just get together, I'm sure you can as neighbours, and work out if 3 of you can represent that position rather than 4. Our first registered speaker tonight is, as I mentioned, for the mayoral minute in regards to Tempe Reserve, and that is Peter Yates, the Director of Corporate Services at Newington College. Now I'll ask all of the speakers tonight to assist me in making sure that we carry out the Code of Meeting Practice. Let us know when you come forward where you're from, if that's not clear already from your registration. You're entitled to 3 minutes when you speak. At 2.5 minutes, you will hear this bell. That's an indication that it's time to wrap up into your powerful crescendo. we're not in the practice of going beyond, of extending time for registered speakers, and the reason for that is if you're the first person tonight, you might feel the need to do so, but if you're the last person to leave tonight, you wish that everybody else, including the councillors, had stuck to time. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm here to speak on the Tempe Reserve Partnership agenda item, and very briefly, Newington College is for such a partnership. The college believes it's an opportunity to help the community, to ensure a better experience for all users of Tempe Reserve. As an existing user, Newington College has a very limited use of Tempe Reserve, typically only after school time, on weekdays and on Saturdays, and for no more than 38 weeks of the year, being the school time. We believe the use of Tempe Reserve by the college is complementary to other users of Tempe Reserve, and we're very much in favour of the partnerships and the other users having the access to what we hope would be an improved facility. The improved facilities, we think, would be made possible via some significant contributions from community groups, including Newington College, and the college is in fact prepared to make a contribution towards the upgrade of Tempe Reserve. As I said, we expect the improved facilities will benefit many community groups, and we're encouraged by the fact that other groups have indicated their willingness to participate in some way, and their expectation that there'll be the ability perhaps of using improved facilities and possibly even greater use through the possible introduction of a synthetic surface or more. The college is willing to work with those community groups, and a number of groups have already contacted the college to ask how they could be involved. We're hoping that discussions with the Inner West Council will enable the capital contribution and the redevelopment of the reserve into a far better facility for all those involved.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Mayor.
Our next registered speaker tonight, we have two speakers for item 5, the notice of motion in regards to Richard Murden Reserve Netball Courts, and the first speaker is Liliana Sanakore of Haberfield.
Hi everyone, my name is Liliana Sanakore and I live in Hawthorne Parade, Haberfield, directly across the roads from this development. Firstly, just quickly, I really wanted to say thank you so much to Councillor Passes for raising the matter, and also thank you to all the other councillors who've taken the time over the last few weeks to listen and be open to the discussion about the concerns of the residents who are immediately affected by ongoing noise and sleep disruptions due to basketball games being played at all hours of the night and the early morning. With that in mind, I don't think it's necessary for me to go through all those details again tonight. I am happy to respond to questions if you have any though. Look, firstly, I really want to stress that my neighbours and I don't have any objection to the facility itself. It's great, you know, you see kids over there playing, that's not an issue. We've all got our own children and we understand that it's really important that they have that physical activity and the positive impact that will have on their lives, both physically and emotionally. The only issue that we have, and we believe is really significant, is the ongoing effect that noise disturbance and disrupted sleep is having to our lives. So I think, you know, council has a responsibility to care for the best interests of the ratepayers, the residents and the community. And I'm confident that you all have seen my suggestions on how we might be able to achieve a compromise for both the residents as well as the users of the court. So really all I'm asking now, please, I'm just asking that you will make a commitment to resolving these problems with a solution that considers the needs not only of the wider community, but also the most basic rights of the residents that live adjacent to this facility. Surely for the peaceful enjoyment of our homes and undisrupted night's sleep. I don't think that's too much to ask. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mayor and councillors, I haven't actually been able to see anything for the last 3 weeks because I only discovered this amendment was coming up last night. none of the community were actually informed. So I am surprised to be here, given that what we're discussing tonight was voted on last year and is almost complete and built. We're all pretty excited in our family and in all the families of the kids that we know. So it was a bit of a shock to find out just last night that this amendment is asking to actually remove the basketball courts that were all voted on and agreed and installed. But I am here representing my sons and their large group of friends who've grown up in Haberfield playing basketball every week on the courts, and also the dad across the road with his little kids, and the dozens of other people who enjoy the courts every day that we know. The courts were there before we moved into Haberfield, well over 20 years ago, and they were probably there well before the residents across the road, some of whom would have bought their houses after the courts were built. Last year, when the proposal was made to give a new set of courts to the Leichhardt netball community at the expense of the basketball players, it was made very clear to council how well loved these courts were. So council came up with what we thought was a great compromise. We're all really happy. It was a win-win situation for multi-purpose courts. The communities both got what they needed. This was voted on, accepted, and is now almost complete. We understand, apart from that there is only one resident that's making continual complaints. I don't know really what the solutions are because, as I said, we haven't been able to, we haven't had the time or the courtesy from council to be shown these. But we also know that the issue was debated last year, the noise was considered, and the minutes included turning the lights out at 9:30, clear signage, regular rangers patrolling. So we are a bit surprised that it's being revisited now. I would like to point out that the courts are next to many other noisy facilities in this reserve. Tennis courts, many netball courts, dog park, playgrounds with equipment, and all of these we know, having lived in the area for so long, are all regularly used by the public day and night. Lots of kids use the whole facility at night. If council was to now remove these new basketball rings, we would have nowhere in the area. There are no public or private basketball courts in our local government area. We've been told that there's also a proposal to fence and lock the courts to restrict access in the evening. Again, that would amount to locking out our local kids who'd have to rely on the netball teams to open and close the gates and result in basically private netball courts for out-of-area players. On behalf of the kids in our area, I ask that council reject this amendment and keep the multi-purpose courts as voted on and agreed last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Next item for which we have registered speakers is item 7, notice of motion, Tillman Park, Untitled Road pedestrian crossing, and that's the issue down the car. Daniel, are you here? No? The last item for which we have registered speakers.
Chair, can I just ask that if Mr Gardner, who I don't know, turns up later on, will we hear him when he turns up?
Sure.
I know it's been a very contentious issue in the area, as I'm sure Councillor York is aware.
Item 8, notice of motion, heritage conservation areas in Lilyfield. Have you all been able to work out 3 people who represent your position? You come forward in whatever order you'd like. Anne-Therese, are you one of them?
Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. It would be a positive outcome of this motion tonight that I thank Councillor Stamalos for advancing if residents of Lilyfield could have further clarity and reassurance about the process forward to expand the Lilyfield heritage conservation areas as per the 2004 Leichhardt Council Heritage Report recommendations. Most Lilyfield residents are passionate about the local character of their area that include mostly historical streetscapes from the late 1800s through to the Second World War, particularly 1920s California bungalows. As many councillors will know, the erosion of these streetscapes is a great concern for us after some it has been very distressing to watch a number of proposed demolitions and actual demolitions of California bungalows over the past year. It has also been very confusing for us as residents. When I moved into Mary Street, Lilyfield in 2003, something went around about the heritage conservation area, and like many neighbours, I ticked the boxes in support, and we assumed that it actually had happened. We assumed that the houses that were in large part exactly the same as the Campbell Avenue heritage conservation area behind it had actually been preserved. So it was many years later that I found only a few years ago, that this was not the case. Some complicated state government intervention that derailed the process or delayed the process, we're not quite sure. Anyway, the point being that even for those of us beginning to develop some literacy in planning processes and planning language, it is still very challenging to understand what is possible and what isn't from a heritage perspective, when it is possible, who needs to make it happen, how does it happen? Is it council staff, is it councillors, is it residents who must do things, is it partnerships? So it is like learning another language for us. And it is also doubtless exhausting for council planning staff and councillors to have to explain yet one more time to residents why it isn't possible that a house can be preserved when there's a proposed demolition, because it's very confusing. So Mayor Byrne was extremely devoted a lot of time and energy last year to trying to explain this to residents who were very distressed, very patiently, and still at the end of it they remained in large part confused. So it would be great if this motion could finally get some clarity to all of us about the process forward. I understand it may be included in the LEP, and it would be great if that process could also be hastened, but I don't think it can, so maybe we can have some confirmation it has to go in with everything else in the LEP. There are other limitations of staff resources, and there are lots of other LEP heritage stuff to do. So just the clarification on the process and timeline forward would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Gloria Mao. Gary Rowley.
Good evening, my name is Gary Rowley. I've lived and worked within the area of Leichhardt for over 50 years. I purchased a house in Mary Street over 32 years ago. It's a Californian bungalow house, and it's situated on the eastern side, which backs onto Campbell Avenue. We are fortunate in the house that I selected that, again, it maintains all the original light windows, high ceilings, all the traditional features of a Californian bungalow. Over the past 30 years, at stages, several residents, including myself, thought the area was heritage listed, but obviously it wasn't. Two houses on the eastern side have carried out renovations under strict council guidelines, keeping the facade and the front of the property in all regards similar to what was expected. However, I've noticed over the past 12 months, there's again changes obviously in demographics, in new people moving in. There's been a change. And this is particular that within 200 metres of my house in Mary Street, there is 5 houses that have been destroyed and new houses are going up. 3 in Mary Street. Now, again, the whole 5 are not claiming to be heritage listed in any sense, in any regards, but it is of concern. There was 3 in Mary Street, 1 in Chapel Street and 1 in Perry Lane. Now, the one that is particular concern was 1 in 27 Mary Street, and without showing props, this is my house, and the house that was destroyed was of similar ilk in that regards. Now, again, they're allowed to do it because the law allows them under the CDC Approval Act. And the concern that I have is that on this property, and it has a larger block of land than the other properties on the eastern side, is that, again, the house is knocked over, there'll be a double garage, the house will be on top of the garages, there's at least 2 levels of that house, it goes back further than the other blocks, and it's just completely out of character in any regards to the remaining 8 houses that are left of the Californian bungalow. Now, I know it's hard and people have their own concept of the house they want as their castle, and that's fine. I'm not asking to change anything other than, if at all possible, when you're reviewing and maintaining the heritage list in that area, that there is some regards to keeping at least the front and the facade in line with the other houses in that regards. And I mean, if this continues with the 5 new houses in the area, next we'll have them complaining about Leichhardt Oval and the noise. I mean, what's next in that sort of area? And all I ask the council is to consider not the whole area, but some streets in the Lilyfield area to maintain its heritage, history, and longevity in that regards. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to speak to this motion. I have lived in Fredbert Street for 29 years. I've lived in Lilyfield for about 5 years longer than that. And I adore the area, and I'm not alone in that. Along with many of my fellow Lilyfield residents, I was shocked in the last decade to discover that the perfect streetscape, that is Fredbert Street, had no preservation or conservation orders whatsoever under the existing heritage classifications. It had a flimsy draft heritage label. According to the advisor I spoke to at the then Leichhardt Council, it meant that as long as work was okayed by the council, I could do pretty much anything within reason. Well, we now know what within reason is. We watched Church Street recently, and it was once the proud main boulevard to Leichhardt Park, which was a place of great activity historically for celebration and for the new residents of the Ostenham estate. Draft heritage means rip it out and start again. In the late 1800s, Leichhardt was subdivided and sold off as a perfect suburb to raise a family. And it was, if you could ignore the stench of the tanneries in Long Cove. But when Messrs Emmerich and Stewart joined forces as builders to the turn of the 19th century, they created the streetscapes of Emmerich, Stewart, and in what later became known as Lilyfield, and they used that experience to then create Fredbert Street. They were very proud of what they called the model Ostenham estate. They limited themselves to 2 main types of house, and they sourced the finest materials they could to create those beautiful streetscapes. In their own words, the houses had heavy marble mantles, tiled hearths, tiled grates, handsome decorated enriched ceilings, all doors beautifully grained and varnished with fan lights over them, massive stone foundations 3 feet deep from our own quarries, a large yard for a garden and poultry run, and then camphor laurel trees were planted down the centre of Fredbert Street to complete the picture of gentrification. Leichhardt West Public School had been gazetted in 1883, and this was an up-and-coming area with a better quality home and community for young families at the time. These are beautiful houses, and they will never be built again. Work was underway on the new estate on Ostenham Road, which is now Lilyfield Road, when Councillor Stewart, who was an alderman on Leichhardt Council, was shot and killed in 1904. Yeah, but it may seem otherwise, but as 65,000 years of human occupation in Australia has taught us, we don't really own these places we live in. We have only our time and place in the march of history and the stories that are woven through it, and we are privileged to live in a place with such distinctive and original architectural character. Our council should not need to be convinced of the need to extend the heritage conservation area. What we do have ownership of is the legacy we leave behind, which absolutely includes a responsibility to preserve some of the real and worthwhile pieces of local history. Tonight we need to realise that heritage conservation is a priority, something to be decided on now, not something to be endlessly delayed, and too much of this heritage has been lost already.
If you could conclude your remarks, your time has expired.
That's it. What will it take for the council to realise that every single piece of our truly heritage streetscape that is lost will never be gotten back again? It's just gone.
Thank you. So that concludes the open forum, public forum section of the council meeting. We've now dealt with 3 mayoral minutes before getting to the rest of the items on the agenda. The first mayoral minute tonight is in relation to Tempe Reserve, and councillors will be aware via the memo circulated on the 6th of August that Newington College has made an approach to council seeking to provide a capital contribution towards the upgrade of Tempe Reserve in return for upgraded facilities and long-term non-exclusive licence for use. Councillors will also be aware that the former Marrickville Council entered into an exclusivity arrangement with Sydney Olympic for the upgrade of the facilities at Tempe Reserve, that was extended a number of times and has now expired without Sydney Olympic actually submitting a proposal or any funding. It is true to say that at that time, Sydney Olympic and Newington were in discussion about how Newington, as a long-term user of Tempe Reserve, could be a partner in that proposal. The college, as I say, is an existing long-term user of Tempe Reserve. The capital funding could see, for example, additional synthetic surfaces, lighting and new amenities being delivered. The usage of the reserve by the school is complementary to other users, as the hours sought do not clash with the evening peak demand, and as has been alluded to by the representative of the school, they're only making use of the facility for 38 weeks a year and not on Sundays at all. Newington College is committed, as has been stated tonight, to that shared and complementary usage. An additional substantial capital contribution from an external partner would allow council to deliver increased public benefits through the upgrade of Tempe Reserve. For example, the intensification of use that would be allowed by synthetic surfacing would assist with the could assist with the Marrickville Red Devils, the second largest junior football club in the Inner West, as well as many other codes, including AFL, rugby, rugby league and cricket. And we have already adopted a policy in relation to Tempe Reserve of supporting it being able to hold synthetic surfaces for that purpose. I think it's worth noting that the primary beneficiaries, as demonstrated by the young women who attended the council meeting a few weeks ago to speak for synthetic surfacing at Leichhardt number 2, would be women and girls, because we're seeing this great flood of increased participation by women and girls in local sport, but they simply don't have access to the fields because they haven't done so historically. So I'm recommending that council notes and supports the ongoing discussion with Newington College regarding its in-principle commitment to a financial contribution to the upgrade of Tempe Reserve. Secondly, that council further notes the resolution of the 28th of May, that we continue to explore opportunities for partnerships for synthetic surface recreation facilities. Thirdly, that results of any further negotiations with external parties be reported to council at the conclusion of those negotiations in tandem with the plan of management for the reserve, which is currently on public exhibition, or maybe that's concluded, but it's been on public exhibition. And fourthly, that as a principle, the project must result in increased use of the grounds by multiple local sporting clubs, including local soccer clubs. So I will move that way. Councillors, discussion? Councillor Hesse?
A question through you to the relevant officer, please, Councillor.
Yes.
Has this matter been put on consultation, or will it, if it was supported by this council, be put to the community for consultation?
I'll put that question to the council officers.
Through the chair, councillors, council will be presented with the engagement outcomes from the first round of the plan of management. Coming out of that will be the draft plan of management. It would be expected that as part of that, we may incorporate partnership arrangements in that plan of management that would then be subject to community engagement.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hesse, did you have further comments?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Chair, and thank you to the officer. Look, I think in light of that, and this is a Mayoral minute, this is a long-standing matter, but it's also one where we've seen a lot of change in, well, a lot of water's flown down the Cooks River, like in the last 5 years, as it were, both metaphorically and of course the changes in pressures in our community and anticipated pressures in our community are happening quick and fast. I don't, and I say this with no disrespect at all to Newington. I don't believe that I'm not looking to change the current situation, but I think this forms part of a significant long-term change of use, and I think we need to fully consult with the community, particularly of Tempe, but more broadly around it. I think it's a major commitment. I can see some benefits, but I think it's very important in all these things that we talk to the community. Frankly, as one of the ward councillors there, I have no writing instructions from people in the community because they don't know about it. And I think that's a problem, ultimately. I can't support the motion tonight, but I'd be prepared to consider it at a future date, even in a couple of weeks if the community got some opportunity to at least comment on this part of it. But I think it's more logical to me to put it in, to put it in with consideration of the plan as a whole, that seems to be a more logical place for it to me, so we can actually, as a council, deal with it in context rather than one out.
Debating it.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Kiat?
Chair, a question through you to the relevant officer. Can I just ask, how is it proposed that this would fit with our sporting grounds allocation policy? Would this fall within that policy?
I'll put that question to the council officers.
Yeah, absolutely, it falls within that. The sporting ground allocation policy acknowledges that we have a number of sporting grounds where we have licences, typically non-exclusive, for those in return for capital contributions or long-term leases. It's not a different concept to a number of other arrangements that we've got.
Thank you for that.
Chair, just to follow up to that, so
Yes.
what does the policy say about this kind of arrangement? Is there any limit on the amount of time or any other guidance?
I'll put that question to the officer.
Yeah, what the licence does, that the licence arrangement is the arrangement that would set out the core hours that would be available to the lessee, so to Newington, for example. The sporting grounds allocation policy will then come into effect around all of the other clubs that would then benefit from the hours that Newington aren't using it.
Thank you for that. Councillors, Councillor Kiat.
Sorry, just to allow one more question. Do we know if any other schools are using Tempe Reserve?
I'll put that question to the officer.
I couldn't answer that right now. Newington certainly, as I've been advised by the staff, is the dominant tenant effectively down there at the moment, particularly during school terms.
Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Macri?
Chair, basically there was a lot of consultation with the residents when we decided to go down that path with the actual partnership with Sydney Olympic. We ran an expression of interest process. The community was well aware of that. It was actually going to be a much larger project encompassing an actual small stadium, boutique stadium down there as well. So this actual part that Newington is stepping into is actually the formalisation of the refurbishment of the fields down there, the grass, the fields that are there, not part of where the Newdown Leagues Club is, the old Newdown Leagues Club. So this essentially, anyone who's played down there or knows, as soon as we get light rain down there, the fields become unplayable. And in Newington's proposal, they're only going to seek the hours they're currently using anyway. It's a way of partnering with a reputable partner, a school, and they're not asking for complete and exclusive use. They're asking for basically the non-peak hours, which are 3 till I think 5:30 on weekdays. The peak hours start after that when all of our clubs and the kids go to their clubs. So they will be able to train there. We'll be able to shift traffic from Mackie Park, which is heavily overused, and lighten the burden. Where, you know, the complaints I get from the people at Mackie Park is there's so many kids out there, you can't train kids in an area, a team in what we're virtually sitting in a chamber, because that's what's happening down there now. That's why every square inch of that park is almost barren, particularly around all the goldmouths. So 38 weeks a year to get that injection of funds, to get an upgrade of a facility that we are looking for money to actually do something with, and to be well supported by the community. I think it is from the previous consultation we've had, and this is a lesser impact than previously, as it's only the grass fields, which is further removed from all the residents. I think it's a no-brainer. We should be running down there to get that work done, so we can actually get on with it and actually try and deliver something in this term down there. Thank you.
Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Kiat.
I'm happy to speak in support of Councillor Hessie's proposal to defer the matter for community consultation. I understand the sentiment expressed by Councillor Macri around, you know, the need for additional funds by our council. Certainly, we do need additional funds for works to this park and many others. And when we're offered that kind of money from a school that has a lot of it, then it's clearly tempting to accept that and quickly seal the deal. And I guess I just want to have a moment of pause so that we can talk to the community and other schools. I mean, there may be other public schools in the area who would not be happy that we were allowing Newington a long-term agreement to use these particular fields on a Tuesday afternoon, every week for the next however many years, when their schools and their classes could be using the same fields. I think we have to face up to the fact that money does talk, and that includes schools. Today there was an excellent report published by the ABC, and I'm just looking at Newington College. They spent $50 million between 2015 and 2017 on capital expenditure. That's an amount of...
Call the meeting to order. Councillor Cat has the floor.
That's an amount of money that's just not available to other public schools in the area where many of our constituents and their kids go. So I think it's important to take pause. I think it's wise. I don't see Newington running away from this deal just because we've tried to engage with our community, and I think we'll get a better outcome for it.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passes.
Spoken like a true Green. I waited for that to come in. The same going after the private schools. This has nothing to do with private or public. This council is scrapped for cash. Whoever's got it, bring it in. We need the playing fields. We want sport fields. You didn't ask that many questions about the basketball and the netball down at Hawthorn Parade, directly opposite people's homes. Now you found something to pick on. If the school's got the money, good luck to them. Envy. Envy does not do you any favours.
Okay, thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Steer, then Councillor De Cruz.
Yes, first of all, I've got a late disclosure to make because I hadn't read this minute before. My son went to Newington College and he graduated in 2006. That's 13 years ago for anyone who tries to make anything of it. He's now 30 years old and living interstate, and I've had nothing to do with Newington College since then. However, I'm making that disclosure so I can make these comments. I think this actually looks like a very good deal, but being brought to us in this way as a mayoral minute has a lot of problems with it. We don't know what the contribution is. We don't know what the work is going to be. There's suggestions in the minute about synthetic surfaces and lighting and amenities building and all those things. That all sounds wonderful, but we actually need to know what the plan is, how much it's going to cost, how much Newington would contribute, how much council would have to contribute, and who are the other users. And I see there's mention of Sydney Olympic here. What's going on with them? We don't know. We haven't been told. If they're still interested in the field, if they're still contributing money, are they doing a deal with Newington? It's all very vague. So I'm going to support, notwithstanding my son's association with Newington, the proposal of Councillor Hesse that this be deferred for community consultation and be brought back, because if it's brought back with answers to those questions that I have raised, I would be inclined to vote for it on another occasion. But it needs to be brought back to us as a formal notice of motion with adequate information and not as a mayoral minute. I would ask, is there any particular reason why this has been brought to us as a mayoral minute? Because that's a matter of urgency rather than in the normal course of business.
Well, I'm very glad that you asked that question in concluding your remarks. Some councillors seem to have not read the memo that was circulated to all councillors confidentially last week regarding this matter. So to put it another way, I'm actually, through this mayoral minute, bringing the matter into the public domain so that the community can be consulted. So I'm sorry that there's some councillors who haven't read the memo. I have referred to it in the background to the motion, and if you have your device available now, you could look it up. There is much greater detail that was provided in the memo, and which is commercial in confidence and therefore can't be reported in the mayoral minute, but which is available to every councillor on your mobile phone or iPad momentarily. Councillor De Cruz, then Councillor McKenna.
Yep, well, I missed that memo because there's so many memos to read and they're not titled or subject matter, so I have no idea which one that is.
I mean, it would be nice to have briefings on some of these matters before they come to council.
Councillor De Cruz, as the person who sends more memos and emails than anyone on this council, I'll ask you to remain relevant and address the resolution.
I mean, I've got to ask the questions because there's no other way to get the information.
Please address
The
the
question
resolution.
I'm asking is, there's some confusion about whether it's going to be used by Newington on Saturday or not.
Okay, I'll put that, is that a question through the chair?
Well, it could be to you since you've read the memo.
I'm happy to answer the question. Have you concluded your remarks?
There was a question.
Well, have you concluded your remarks? Because
No.
I'll answer it at the end. Please
It's a question.
continue and I'll answer that.
It was a question as to whether it'd be used on Saturday and what time would be allowed for the other company. And also the other issue was I understood that the proposal to upgrade to synthetic was to increase the availability of the grounds. How will Newington's involvement impact that increased availability of the grounds?
And is that a question to me?
2 questions.
Okay, excellent. I'm happy to answer them, although obviously if councillors would prefer to have independent advice from an officer, that's fine too. Newington currently use the ground and have done for a long period of time on weekday afternoons and on Saturdays. The proposal that they have put forward, whilst not disclosing confidential information, is that they continue with exactly the same usage but invest capital with council into establishing synthetic surfaces, a number of synthetic surfaces at Tempe Reserve. As councillors will be aware, but may not agree, because of course not all councillors voted for the plan of management or putting it out on public exhibition, including some councillors who've spoken for consulting with the community tonight, synthetic surfacing allows for intensification of use. So whilst Newington would have the same number of hours, on the additional hours, the hours outside of that, the amount of use that could take place from multiple different codes and local sporting clubs would be greatly intensified, by conservative measures at least doubled. So I hope that answers your question, but I'm happy to put it to the officers so they can give you the information if you prefer.
Okay, perhaps you could clarify for me through the chair to the officers, what hours of use does Newington use the grounds on a Saturday?
I'll put that question to the council officers.
We're just looking up, councillor. I think the hours, if I recall correctly, were 8:30 till 4 on a Saturday.
Thank you for that. Councillor McKenna. Councillor McKenna.
Mayor, I just wanted to say because I've heard all of this discussion, what we're approving and what you're asking for, that council notes and supports the ongoing discussion with Newington College, nothing more. So it is now in the public arena. It is now, and what we're talking about is discussion, not about proceeding to the final, the end point. I'm sure it will come back to council again. Is that not the process, that question?
It is, councillor. Thank you for that. If there's no further discussion, I'll make a very brief right of reply. So councillors will be aware that Tempe Reserve Plan of Management has been out on public exhibition. Councillors will also be aware that a number of councillors who've spoken in support of community consultation during this debate did not support putting that out on public exhibition, didn't support the amendment to the draft amendment to the Plan of Management, and didn't support putting it out for consultation. It wasn't unanimous at that time. But that decision has been made, and I think there is a clear majority of councillors who support the intensification of use at that select ground that could come about through synthetic surfacing. So the question is, how will that be funded? Now we have a very long-standing local school that is very well resourced, which has made an offer, which I believe on face value is demonstrably in the public interest, which will result in an improved facility with greater utilisation by the whole of the community. Now, I'm in favour of wealthy institutions investing money in things that have demonstrable community benefit and benefit kids from right across the community, including those who can't afford to attend those schools. Or in other words, as that old proverb says, never look a gift horse in the mouth. Yep. So this resolution simply says that we should continue those discussions. I'm sorry that some councillors haven't read the memos. I know that we do get a lot of them, a lot of emails too. I try to read the memos, but not all the emails. And so this is not seeking to do anything other than bringing that negotiation out into the light, into the public domain, and requiring that if it leads to anything, that be reported back to this body at the same time that we receive the Tempe Reserve Plan of Management.
We'll put the question.
So I hope that this could be a unanimous resolution. Councillor Stamos, I'm sorry debate has closed because I'm making my right of reply. But for even those councillors who don't support the synthetic surfacing, I hope that you will support the notion that we should pay for it in the most responsible way that we can. I'll now put the recommendation. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All those against? Councillor Hesse, De Cruz and Kiat against. That has been carried.
One at again, boys.
Next item. There's two more Mayoral minutes. They're both, I think, reasonably uncontroversial, so I'll attempt not to speak to them at any great length. Councillors will be aware that we recently received correspondence from the Area Health Service responsible for Balmain Hospital, expressing grave concern about the state of the footpath outside the hospital and the safety implications for largely elderly and frail patients at the hospital. Council officers have informed me, and I believe other councillors, that they have allocated the funds for an upgrade of those footpaths during this year, and this resolution would simply see us expedite that and try to undertake the works prior to Christmas. So I will move that way. Councillor Passos?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I would like to commend you and the staff and the General Manager for moving so quickly on this. It is our responsibility to make sure that the pedestrian walkways, in fact the whole municipality, is as safe as it can be, and sadly, we're running behind. But because this is a hospital, there are elderly people, I have to commend, and I don't do that lightly, as you will know, the staff and the council for moving so quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion, councillors? Councillor Stamos?
Mr Mayor, fellow councillors, I visited the hospital last week to have a quick discussion about this item. Part of it's about footpath renewal works and other parts are about pedestrian and traffic safety treatments. The driveways in and out of the hospital, of course, need to be very, very big given the ambulances and other traffic that might be moving in and out. So part of this works, of these works are about those necessary safety and risk treatments to the driveways. Mr Mayor, is that included as part of this Mayoral minute?
The second point of the resolution is that officers engage with hospital management in the development of the scope of the footpath renewal works. So I agree with you that we need to ensure that it actually meets the needs of the hospital, and am open to any amendment to that wording which would ensure that.
That's good.
Excellent. Any further discussion, councillors? Councillor De Cruz.
Yes, I have visited the site a few years ago to accept a patient. Patients from all over the local government area go there for convalescence from RPA on the way to rehabilitation, and I can say that the pedestrian amenity around that hospital was pretty bad, so I probably did. I was trying to find the email which I might have submitted. So I actually took the patient in a wheelchair to the park across the road, which is a good experience.
Point of order, Chair. Can we live without Councillor Pass's comments, please?
Just a moment, Councillor De Cruz. Councillor Hesse has moved a point of order. I'll ask Councillor Stamoulis to resume his seat. I'll ask Councillor Passos to desist from interjecting. Councillor De Cruz has the floor.
So I don't have the detail of this. It may have been shared in a memo, but I actually think that there was. I can't remember whether there's a pedestrian crossing from the hospital side, so that patients can go and enjoy the park across the road. That would be a priority. I also believe that one of the issues might be that this is a Gladstone Park where buses are now terminating as well. So that also might complicate the issue. But nonetheless, I think improving pedestrian amenity in the area should be a high priority and would be a very important thing to do.
Thank you for that. If there's no one who wishes to speak against the recommendation, I'm happy to incorporate Councillor Stamoulis' suggested amendment as point 2. And I'll put that, all those in favour, against, declare that carried unanimously. The last Mayoral minute tonight, councillors, is in relation to the Greenway. Councillors will be aware that the project has been significantly delayed. There is what I think could fairly be described as bureaucratic inertia within New South Wales government agencies, which is resulting in that delay. And to be blunt, the project is actually imperilled. It's not clear to me that it is going to proceed at any point in the near future. I think it's a complicated project and one that requires both various council departments and various state government departments working concurrently, and at the moment that's not working, to be blunt. So I'm seeking that we I've outlined in the background to this mayoral minute the range of issues that are affecting the project, and I think we need to seek assistance from the relevant ministers, in particular Andrew Constance and Rob Stokes. We know that the state government has very generously funded this project. So there's a large amount of state government funding that is involved in the project. It's in their interests for this to be a success. Ironically, some of that funding is now imperilled by the delays in approvals because of state government agencies. So there's timelines that we're not meeting. So without seeking to attribute blame, I think it's important that we take action to try and get an outcome and to cut through some of this inertia. And so I'm seeking a resolution that we write to those ministers requesting their assistance in obtaining approvals from agencies currently preventing the work from going ahead, and that subsequent to the landowner's consent being obtained for the development application and prior to the application being submitted, that the revised concept plans be reported back to an ordinary council meeting for review, and thirdly, that council recommit to amendments to the master plan incorporated by councillors at the time of its adoption. So I will move that way. Councillors, discussion. Councillor Hesse.
Thanks, Mayor, for bringing this to the council. I think it's a good suggestion, and I would agree with your summation. My experience with the Wallow Creek Regional Park is it indeed, and I can see the CEO nodding, that it is indeed the bureaucrats who don't respond. And I'm sure that the member for Summerhill and the member for Balmain, if brought into it, would happily support this, given their long-term support for the project. And thank you for bringing it forward. So happy to support. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good suggestion. Why don't we incorporate that into the motion by CCing them and asking for their assistance? I'll liaise with the minute takers about that. Any further discussion, councillors? Yeah. Councillor Passos?
I knew it was a joke, the whole concept, from day one. And I knew it would never, I expected it to get to this. It was a good political tool, and if we have to tell the member for Summerhill and Balmain about it, and can they come on board and help, what have they been doing representing their area? Why haven't they brought this up themselves in Parliament? They're out there working for us, aren't they? Weren't they aware of this? And I haven't seen the residents all jumping up and down and screaming. But it was a good idea at the start, where we had a few groups of people, political people, that had some nice free dinners and a nice few drinks out of it. Total waste of money.
Okay. So if we could incorporate into the motion that the correspondence be copied to the member for Summerhill and the member for Balmain. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. That brings us to the rest of the business papers. The first item is the public domain master plan for Dulwich Hill Station Precinct. Will someone move adoption of that? Moved by Councillor Passos, seconded by Councillor Kiat. Discussion. Councillor Passos, do you wish to speak to it? Councillor Kiat.
I'd just like to move an amendment with respect to the undergrounding option of the electrical wires. I'd just like to record our support for that option at this time. You know, obviously it depends on the how the project plays out financially, but I would just like to put on the record that we have a strong preference that that option to underground the electrical infrastructure.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Kiat has the floor.
That the option to underground the electrical infrastructure be pursued, if possible, because I frequent that area often, and I think that large trees would be very welcome there. But I can see that a lot of those electrical poles, which I've put many core flutes on in the past, and are useful for that purpose, but are quite ugly otherwise.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, further discussion? There's no further discussion. I'll ask Councillor Passos if she's willing to incorporate Councillor Kiat's amendment into the primary motion.
Because there's no way it's going to happen, so no, I'm not.
Okay, so that's not incorporated. Is there a seconder for the Kiat amendment? Seconded by councillor Hesse. There's no further discussion. I'll go to councillor Passos for her right of reply.
Look, Mr Mayor, it's also very well for councillors trying to get kudos, that we'd like to see all the poles underground. The money's just not there. But maybe, let's go and ask Newington, they might pay for it and put them underground.
Okay, I'll put the Kiat Hesse amendment. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All those against? 1, 2, 3. That has been carried. I'll put the Passos primary motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against? That has been carried unanimously. Next item, land and property strategy. I wish to move the officer's recommendation with an amendment. Firstly, I would like to preface the moving of that resolution by thanking the council officers for their diligent work in the preparation of what is a very complicated policy document. I know it's been a very drawn-out process that's involved a lot of intricate and detailed work. So I'd like to thank the Chief Executive, the Manager of Properties and the Deputy General Manager for their diligence in having produced this document for us for adoption tonight. I think the broad parameters that it sets for the council in relation to properties are good, and I'm happy to endorse them. I would like to move an amendment that specifically acknowledges the nature of neighbourhood centres within the local government area. Councillors will be aware that we have both Newtown Neighbourhood Centre and Summerhill Community Centre, which are generalist neighbourhood centres which service a very broad cross-section of their local communities. We have other neighbourhood centres within the LGA, but we have no other generalist neighbourhood centres that are long-term tenants of council properties. So Roselle Neighbourhood Centre, for example, in my ward is a terrific organisation, but one that has never occupied a council property. I think it's important at the outset of this process, while we'll be working through leases systematically, and there's a lot of them to deal with now once we get some principles in place, I think it's important at the start of this process to acknowledge that neighbourhood centres are a different category unto themselves. They are crucial service providers in our local community. I think it's fair to say that if those two organisations didn't exist, that it would fall upon council, the responsibility to be able to provide those sorts of services. So whilst we are already providing an accommodation grant to both Newtown Neighbourhood Centre and Summerhill Community Centre, I think they are actually providing a service subsidy to us that were it to be left as a void, we would have to step into. So I want to propose, and I'll just ask the minute takers to scroll down so that all of the amendment that I'm proposing is visible to councillors. It's not currently visible to me. Perfect, thank you. I want to propose that we adopt a category of neighbourhood centre in the land and property strategy, that we identify the Newtown Neighbourhood Centre and Summerhill Community Centre as the two organisations currently located in council properties which are allocated to this category, and that the definition of neighbourhood centre is to include only organisations that provide generalist neighbourhood services and advice, accessed by a wide cross-section of the community and have an existing long-standing tenancy in council premises. That we adopt a policy of 100% accommodation grant to neighbourhood centres that covers all rental costs, that we require them to pay outgoing costs, which is a change to their current circumstances, and that we simultaneously review existing grants to neighbourhood centres with a view to increasing the grant to reflect increased costs since the grants were first established. For example, Summerhill Community Centre receives a grant of about $40,000 a year and has received that same amount for the last 2 decades. Now, obviously, there's been some inflation over the period of 20 years. That we establish formal quarterly meetings between council officers and the board of neighbourhood centres to assist in collaboration, joint programming and maintenance of the premises, and that we then consult with Newtown Neighbourhood Centre and Summerhill on the detail of this policy, confirm their current subleasing and hiring revenue arrangements, and identify which services they're currently providing, and that then be reported back to council urgently. I don't think this needs to drag on very long at all. I think it could be reported back here within a short period of time, and that we give in principle commitment tonight that once we've finalised that policy with their consultation, that we will offer both organisations a minimum of a new 5-year lease based on those conditions. So I will move the primary motion with that amendment incorporated. Councillor Passis has become the seconder of that. Councillor Passis, do you wish to speak to it?
No, I don't, but I'm not sure of the Newtown establishment, but I know very well the Summerhill one that's been there for years. And as you did say, Mr Mayor, they look after all cross sections of the community. The unfortunates from the boarding houses, the management committee there, they go above and beyond of what a community centre would do. They make breakfast for people, even homeless people. And I have always supported this centre, and I always will. And I think it's a good idea that our council staff become involved. They can attend the meetings. They can see for themselves how the Summerhill Centre is delivering for the community. And I believe if council took it over and had to do it, it would cost double, if not more.
Thank you for that. Councillor York?
Thanks, Mayor. I'd also like to move an amendment that I hope will be acceptable to you, which I've provided to the minute takers, but which essentially, it's only very short, but essentially builds on the spirit of what you've just moved, but specifically says that all tenants are to be advised and engaged throughout the implementation of the land and property strategy with a view to actively supporting the continuity of essential community services delivered from tenanted properties. So the spirit of that amendment is to acknowledge that in addition to the neighbourhood centres that you've identified in your amendment, I mean, we've got close to 300 properties. There are a large number and variety of essential community services in addition to the neighbourhood centres that are delivered out of those. And I would like to see special care being taken in the implementation of this strategy to ensure that there's no disruption to those services, or that any disruption is absolutely minimised, and that the continuity of those services that include things like homelessness outreach services and childcare services is assured as much as possible. I might just speak very briefly as well in support of the amendments that the Mayor has moved, in particular having been in discussions with the Newtown Neighbourhood Centre. I know that that they're in support of the spirit of these amendments, and that also gets to assuring them continuity of the really important services that they offer in the Newtown community. So very much in support of those as well.
Thank you for that. Councillors, further discussion? Councillor Cat, then Councillor De Cruz.
A question through the chair.
Yeah.
With respect to
just ask the Deputy General Manager to pay attention to Councillor De Cat's.
Sorry to interrupt.
To Councillor Kiat's question through the chair.
With respect to the Summerhill Community Centre, there's a proposal here for a renewal of the lease. Are there any current plans with respect to the future of the tenancy of that centre?
I'll put that question to the council officers.
Through the chair, no. We have always intended that remain as a community centre of some sort. The current tenant does not have a lease, and it's council's intention to enter into a lease for the premises.
Councillor Kiat.
Sorry, enter into a lease with the existing tenant.
By the motion before you, council, that would be the arrangement.
Okay, there wasn't a pre-existing plan to do that. Okay. And sorry, just a further question.
Yes.
Was there a community engagement report prepared following the exhibition of the land and properties, the draft land and property strategy?
Put that to the council officers.
Through the chair, councils, that's correct, and that's currently available on the Your Say Inner West website.
Okay, I wasn't able to locate that. Look, I also want to thank the officers for their work on this. It's a long-standing project that we've dealt with before and discussed before. I think that it warrants additional discussion, and it's not something that I feel comfortable endorsing tonight. There are a few other issues that I hope to be able to discuss through a briefing. The main issues that I wanted to discuss, I wasn't able to find the community engagement report. I did look on the RSA website, so my apologies if I've missed that, but I know that there were a number of submissions. I understand that some of them would be from existing tenants, and I'm keen to engage meaningfully with the submissions they've made, particularly around the issue that Councillor York has raised around the changes to the way that we will charge rent and the accommodation grants. I want to understand better exactly how those accommodation grants will be applied and how they'll work, and understand the concerns of existing tenants, especially those who are providing community services. I also think that it would be useful for us to better understand how the land and property strategy will address key strategic community objectives. That's really what I was looking for when I was reading this. I understand that there's a drive to see how we can be more commercial and make more revenue out of our existing property portfolio. But I also want to see what are the mechanisms that will drive better utilization in terms of our strategic community objectives. That's really the focus I want to see, and I want that to be something that the community has confidence in and that we all as councillors have confidence in as well. So I've put up a foreshadowed motion. I think that this should be deferred. I'm looking forward to discussing it further. I think it's a very important piece of work, and I understand that already a lot of work has been done, and we're already seeing initiatives arising out of the great amount of work that has been done with respect to our property portfolio.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, further discussion. Councillor Stamos.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, De Cruz, then Councillor Stamos.
Just with regard to the community engagement, I think that was the 33 submissions. Is that correct?
I'll put that question to the council officers.
And
I'll put that question to the council officers.
That's correct.
yeah. I didn't see those either. I did ask about them, and the CEO offered to go through all 33 here, but I agree with Councillor Kiat that doing that in the form of a briefing would be a better approach. I don't know if the Newtown Neighbourhood Centre and the Summerhill Centres were two of those people who made submissions. Was that the case?
I'm going to put that question at the end because you've begun your remarks now.
Okay. So, yeah, my concern is that when we looked at the objectives, there's about 8 dot points, and the first dot point is actually the focus on revenue and sales, and then right at the end is the strategic plan. So I think we have to adjust how we look at this plan and say we have a strategic responsibility to our community. I'm also a little puzzled because we talk about 2036 in our strategic plans, but then we only talk about a 10-year plan for our property strategy. So I think if we're looking at a 2036 plan, we actually need to look at how we get there. Property is an extremely important investment vehicle. It's got very good returns. I mean, historically, that makes council very rich. I also did ask the CEO if he could clarify what percentage of the land and, in fact, the value attributed to that land was actually in roads and what was in, I guess, the other categories of land and property we have. And I think just as a structural document, because the focus seemed to be from the feedback that we received in the summary report, it all seemed to be about ongoing leases, which is, I think, potentially is a much smaller component of this strategy, or is really all that strategy is about. I did actually find reference to sales in the policy, but nothing in the strategy about sales. So I guess I'm asking for more information. I don't have that information before me now. I didn't have it provided previously, and I would like that provided to me in a briefing.
Okay, thank you for that. And can you remind me the question that you wanted to put through the chair?
Oh yeah. What percentage of the land that council owns is roads, and what percentage of the value attributed to that land is roads?
Wow. Okay, I'll put that to the officers.
To be clear, councillors, this policy has absolutely nothing to do with our roads, okay? So when we're talking about our properties, we're talking about our titled properties that are effectively our lands that we have buildings on in particular. In terms of our asset value, our total asset value, I think, is sitting at 1.1 billion, and I think my best guess is 800 million of that is sitting in roads.
Thank you for that.
That's a different
Councillors,
figure
further
that's
discussion?
provided, yeah.
Councillor Stamoulis, then Councillor Hesse.
Just 4 quick questions through the chair, if I could, thank you. I'm looking at page 18 of the draft LAPS. Can I just confirm that we have 10 currently affordable housing units? Is that correct?
Put that question to the council officers.
It's the top of page 18.
Top of page 101.
Oh, 101 of the top, yeah.
We'll just deal with Councillor Stamoulis's questions first.
But that's 2 in it.
Through the chair, that's correct. So what the report is suggesting is that we have 10 affordable housing units at this point in time. Very soon, we're about to get another 9 or 10 through down the former Marrickville Hospital
Okay, you
site.
clarified my question by the 9 or 10 extra. In terms of the residential, directly under that, we have 5 of the 6 residential properties sitting in the Balmain ward. There's no others in other wards, except for that one in Marrickville. Is that correct?
I'll put that question to the council officers.
That's correct, councillors.
Okay.
Oh, you're one.
Right.
The properties that have been listed there, aside from the Illawarra Road property, are ostensibly the caretaker residents out of the former Leichhardt Council.
Good. 2 pages down on page 20 of the strategy, or 103 of the whole document. Looking at that very first pink table, those total values seem a little bit odd. Those 2 numbers of total values, one has a dollar sign with the square metres at the end. The other is either missing a digit or something. Maybe you might want to correct those if you like. Just looking at those 2 numbers.
Okay, we'll take that as a
And finally,
correction.
my final comment, which is a bit more substantive, is there any way we can benchmark our land and property strategy against other councils that are nearby? Have we undertaken that process, or will we think of doing that at some stage to see that we're getting the returns, or we have the number of assets which are compatible with the distribution of assets?
I'll put that question about benchmarking to the council officers.
Through the chair, councillors, certainly in the formation of the policy and the strategy itself, we referenced a number of other councils to have a look at what their equivalent strategies would be. That said, it's almost impossible to benchmark, and we haven't done a benchmarking exercise as such because each council has a wildly different property portfolio. Makes it very difficult.
Right, thanks.
Okay, further discussion, councillors. I've got Councillor Hesse.
Chair. My questions are regarding unsolicited proposals. I guess it's through you to the CEO or another officer, depending on if that's relevant. Are there any current unsolicited proposals out there, and will we as councillors be getting advice on what the proposed use of existing buildings might be as far as leasing out or not, so that there's an opportunity potentially for suggestions either from councils or community about how we can approach some of the more strategic uses of these buildings?
I'll put that question to the council officers.
Apologies, Councillor, I'm a little confused as to the question. The first one was, do we have any unsolicited proposals with us at the moment? The Newington College approach is exactly that.
Councillor Hesse.
Perhaps I could just add,
Yes.
just to correct perhaps a misimpression, we don't earn much money out of any of our buildings. There's a $3 million income out of the Tyne lease, which is a container depot, and that's about it. So it was suggested by one councillor that it was a rich proposition. At the moment it isn't. It's unlikely to be in the near future.
Thank you for that.
And so just to clarify, will we as councillors be given an opportunity to discuss this perhaps at a workshop about how we as representatives of the community feel about various buildings and what the future might be?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Happy to do so.
Okay, this is fast becoming a workshop. So, councillors, is there anyone who wishes to further amend? We've got a primary motion for adoption of the policy with incorporated amendments. I'm happy to incorporate Councillor York's amendment. We've got a foreshadowed motion for deferral pending a briefing. Does anyone have any amendments that they'd like to move? Councillor Macri. Just ask you to turn your microphone on, or
amend the
Ron
motion
Kennedy will
on
do it
the neighbourhood centres.
pulsarily.
Yep, I think it was point B, where it says adopt a policy of 100% accommodation grant to neighbourhood centres based on capacity. They have to demonstrate they've got a need for it or have a capacity where they need that subsidising.
Right.
Based on capacity to pay.
Okay, well, if you could provide that wording to the minute taker.
And then I'll just speak on the general substantive report. I think it's good. I think it, for me, it ticks the boxes. All those points are equally important and they work in unison with each other, whether one's listed first or one's listed last. I don't think that's an issue. I go through to the key things, which are the principles, and they're all there, and they're to optimise the benefits to the community, are sustainable and equitable. That's very important. Demonstrate industry best practice, be transparent, consistent, manage risk and demonstrate best value for money. That's important. Meet the needs of our community now and into the future. And 4, optimise council's revenue to support services delivery, community capacity. I mean, they're the principles that tie in, which will allow us to deliver our CSP. I mean, that's what it is. Without those principles, you don't get it. They're already in there. We have to make them work. That's all. That's all I'll say. So I'll be supporting the motion and hopefully we'll support the amendment.
Thank you for that. So, councillors, now, Councillor De Cruz, you've already spoken to this motion. You got another question? Okay.
Yeah, I just wondered whether we've done the work through the chair to date on the difference between, I don't know, is it the market rent for our properties and the value of the grants we have to offer to make up the difference, I guess, to what they currently pay. So I was looking for an approximate value of that accommodation grant.
Not sure I understand the question, but I'll pose it to the officers anyway.
Through the chair, councillors, obviously each of these premises are dealt with on a case-by-case basis. We look at it as a property portfolio rather than that case-by-case when we're looking at that. Our best and approximate guess on that would be it's worth about $500,000.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, is there any further discussion? If not, I'll make a brief right of reply. So we've got a primary motion which has had several amendments incorporated. I won't incorporate Councillor Macri's amendment, but we will deal with it, and I'll speak to that momentarily. I just want to reinforce the advice that we received from the Chief Executive a moment ago. This is not about making money out of our properties. Currently, ratepayers are subsidising the cost of these properties to a very, very large degree. There's many, many organisations that are not paying any outgoings. We know now, following the new improved asset management processes that have been implemented since the amalgamation and since this council was elected, that we simply have not been investing enough money in maintaining these properties. We have not got enough properties in the commercial category, that is, properties that are actually bringing in a return so that we can afford to subsidise all of the good organisations who we want to house. So we do need a policy in place that will see a better return, not for councillors, not for council staff, for ratepayers. And so that's something that we need to come to terms with. There's no magic pudding here. I agree with the principle of Councillor Macri's amendment, but having consulted closely with both neighbourhood centres on the draft wording of the motion that I'm moving, I'm reluctant to further amend it without consulting with them, but there will be a consultation process, and it was Councillor Macri's suggestion to me that we should insist on finding out about the subleasing arrangements and the sub-hiring arrangements at both of these community centres. And we do need to have that transparency and to be in possession of that information before we can determine the policy and the extent of the accommodation grant. I agree with that, but so I won't incorporate that and won't vote for it, but I agree with the general principle and have incorporated a further amendment from Councillor Macri prior to the meeting. Just in relation to the foreshadowed motion, councillors, we have literally been preparing this policy for the entire term of this council. I remember on the first day that I went into the office after the mayoral election, I asked for a list of the properties that we had and was told that we weren't in possession of one, and that we were going to prepare a property strategy which would look at all of that. It's literally 2 years later, and we're just getting to the stage where all of that information's been collated, where good, sound principles have been developed by the officers that can help us to make sure these properties are properly maintained and that the organisations within them are able to partner with us. So I just don't understand the purpose of deferral. If there's a substantial problem with the policy, then it could be amended tonight, but deferral for further briefing sessions I really don't think is a constructive way forward. So I would encourage councillors to support adoption and further amendment at a later date if that's what they so choose. So is there a seconder for Councillor Macri's amendment?
I second it.
Seconded by Councillor Passis. I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That has been defeated. I'll now put the primary motion. If that's defeated, we'll put the foreshadowed motion. Is there a seconder for the Kiat motion? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. The primary motion is moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Passis. I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All those against? 1, 2, 3. Councillors Hesse, Kiat and De Cruz against. That has been carried and the policy has been adopted. Next item. Now, councillors, the next item is in relation to matters to be considered in confidential session, the land and property initiatives. I'm going to presume that there are councillors who would like to discuss those matters or ask questions through the chair.
It is seconded deferral, if that's what you're moving at.
And suggest that that be deferred until we've held our confidential session tonight. So that's moved by Councillor Hesse, seconded by myself. But we don't want to go into confidential session now. Moved by Councillor Hesse, seconded by myself. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a period of 5 minutes. informed by the officers.
Whistle's blown, folks. Back.
Resume the meeting. I've been informed by the officers that the one registered speaker who we missed out on arrived shortly afterwards, after that, having been their spot having been supplanted. So I'm going to go back very briefly to the registered speaker for item 7, Tillman, Unwins Bridge Road, pedestrian crossing, Daniel Gardner.
Hello, councillors. Daniel was unable to make it, but I'm here in his stead. I'm a local resident as well, Lisa Sandrick.
Excellent. The new improved Daniel. Please proceed.
Thank you very much for returning to this item on the agenda. I just wanted to recognise Councillor York and appreciate you for raising this motion. So as the item notes, that it is a high traffic area and there is a daycare where the Tillman Park Unwins Bridge Road crossing is, which many local residents use every day. And being a local resident and parent with 2 children at this daycare, I have experienced a number of near misses on this crossing, and the most recent one was this morning with my 2 children. So I am aware that the RMS know about the dangers of this crossing from attending the Baby Expo in 2014, when pregnant with my first child. They had a stand at the Baby Expo talking about safety and road crossings. And when speaking to the ladies that were just on a stand at an expo, they said, oh yes, they said, where do you live? And I said, I live in Sydenham. We have a really bad crossing near us. And they said, oh yes, Unwins Bridge Road. And this was 5 years ago, and still nothing has changed about this crossing. I appreciate that the comments note that the previous investigations have found that, you know, grant funding was not allowed from RMS, or it was without success, and that it has been submitted again for funding consideration in 2019. I really appreciate that, and I just implore all of the councillors to approach this issue with vigour, because as we know, and the minutes state, that there was a loss of life in 2016, and that there was another significant near miss on the 25th of July this year. Now, the impacts are not, you know, as significant on the community each day, wondering if I'm going to be okay crossing this road and returning to my family that day. So I do encourage everyone on the council to, you know, go hard at it with the RMS and to do the consultations with the community, because it's not only the mental health impact on the community each day when you're crossing this road, it is, you know, how many lives does it take to get a set of lights? Thank you. I appreciate you revisiting this item.
Thank you very much. So we're up to item 4, referral of draft June 30, 2019 financial statements for audit. I presume that's uncontroversial. Will someone move the adoption of that? Moved by Councillor Macri, seconded by Councillor McKenna. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Item 5, notice of motion to alter Richard Murden reserve provision of 3 netball courts. Councillor Passis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I did not put this motion up because I had nothing to do that day. I had a lot to do. I'm very, very busy. I have a mother that's dying, and I have a husband that I care for full time. I put this motion up because a few residents have contacted me with living with an unbearable situation. I would just like councillors that have children and have some concrete in their home, and they've had children that bounce balls day and night. It can drive you mad, even though you love them. So imagine what it's like to drive you mad late at night, 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I have spoken to a few councillors about this. If we don't move the basketball rings, we'd have to fence the netball courts, and we'd have to work out some way that they can be locked at night and no access. It is not fair for residents that oppose this in the first instance, had this foisted upon them,
to have to put up with this. It's people's lives. These people work. They need to sleep. So that is the whole reason I put this motion up. And that when I put that motion up, I thought that is the only way around it, because I really did not want to spend any more money, ratepayers' money. It cost about $800,000 to put the netball courts in. So now it's going to cost more money to fence it off. I will move this motion that we fence the netball courts and we find a way of having them locked at a acceptable time in the evening. But we have to find a way to do this that we don't waste any more of ratepayers' money. As I spoke to two people on this issue, councillors must have the wisdom of Solomon to try and appease everybody. We are trying to fit so much sport facilities into a place that's shrinking. We are running out of space. We are intensifying in any bit of green space that we have, and it is an impact on residents. When these places, Hawthorn Parade was a passive walkway. Now it's becoming like the Canberra Institute of Sport. You cannot expect residents to put up with this. So I'm in councillors' hands here, so everyone is kept happy, but we needed to come back a report. How much is this fence going to cost? And we have to find a way that these courts can be locked at night. Because it is just not fair to me, it's criminal that residents have to put up with this. I would like councillors to stop and think, would they like somebody to be outside their home, 2 o'clock in the morning, bouncing a basketball on the concrete footpath?
Your time has expired. Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Passis. I would like to propose, I've had detailed discussions about this matter with Councillor Passis and with Councillor McKenna, and I would like to propose an amendment or a replacement motion that is in line with what Councillor Passis has articulated, and I've provided the wording of that to the minute takers. I think there is a solution to this which will allow multi-use of the courts but also protect residential amenity at night, and that is for the additional fencing to enclose the perimeter of the facility. Council officers have informed me that that will cost not $2,500 but $25,000. And I think we can undertake that perimeter fencing, that those funds can be drawn from the $3.6 million that's unexpended for exactly this park, essentially, the Greenway project Northern Links, that we ask or require netball clubs using the facility for evening training to lock the courts at the conclusion of training, and that council seek to vary the contract, the existing contract, for the closure and opening of nearby Richard Murden Reserve toilet block to allow for the netball basketball courts to be opened each morning and closed on the evenings on which netball training doesn't take place there. I would think that will be a minority of weekday evenings during the week. Now, council officers have given an estimate of $20,000 for the cost of that closing of the gate. I don't accept that at face value. There may be some cost, but I don't believe it could cost $20,000 a year to require someone to walk 100 metres from the toilet block that's already being opened and closed to the netball court, which can be opened and closed. However, if necessary, any further budget variation required could be reported back to council. And so I'm going to propose that. It's in line with the objective that Councillor Passis is seeking to meet. So Councillor Passis will become the mover of that and I will become the seconder of that. So further discussion, councillors. Councillor De Cruz.
Yes, I think I spoke to the resident also, and this is a desirable outcome. I'd just like to add one little thing. Having played netball as a child and coached, I took one look at those netball hoops and was surprised to find them at the same height as the basketball hoops. I've did a little bit of research, and apparently for children under 10 or 11, the netball hoops are only at 8 metres or 8 foot. So I was wondering if some 8-foot hoops could actually be attached to the fence. So little kids can practice within that $25,000 cost. I don't think it'll be significant. Just attach them to the posts of the. I mean, it would be nice if there was actually a court, and that might be something to discuss with the Netball Association. But practice hoops would be good.
Okay, well, I haven't got the tape measure out, so I'm not going to accept that amendment, but we can deal with that democratically. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Stamoulis.
Mr Mayor, I think this is a very good solution for the residents in the local area who are getting disturbance after hours while preserving the use of those courts. So I think this is a solid outcome. I was going to propose that we investigate a range of options, but I think this is probably the one that sort of consolidates that fairly well. I would like to ask the question, however, at how soon could we actually get these works done?
Okay, I'll put that question to the council officers.
We'll take that on notice and come back at the next meeting about timing. We'll have to just think about whether we can extend the existing contractor who's left the site or incorporate it within the toilets, which are to be built this financial year. So we'll come back to you on that.
Thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? There's no further discussion. I'll go to
Sorry.
Yes,
I just want to thank Liliana and Annalise who spoke tonight. I think that the conflict of use between netballers and basketballers, and then the conflict of with the interests of local residents, is one that we did consider previously when we were looking at approving the construction of this new facility. And I think that it's important, and as Annalise raised, to recognise the interest of informal users. I think those who don't play basketball and haven't been involved in that community might not realise how significant informal basketball usage is. But as Annalise was describing to me just now, you know, her sons still use it late into their 20s all the time, and I still use my local basketball court informally, and whenever I'm there, there's always lots of people playing. So it is a really important community to recognise. So thank you for bringing their interests here tonight. And thanks also to Liliana, who obviously, whenever we install a facility, we need to take into account the interests of residents. We're still, I mean, I had nothing to do with the Arlington Synthetic Turf Oval, and we still get lots of correspondence from local residents there about noise issues. So it's something that we do need to consider very carefully. And for that reason, I mean, I think it would have been useful to consider what other options were available, but I'll take it on good faith that that this option is one that has been considered carefully by our staff in consultation with the mayor and the interested parties, and so it's something that I think that I can support.
Councillor Macri, and then I'll go to Councillor Passos for her right of reply.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's important when you're comparing the example of Arlington Oval, where it didn't matter what the turf was, those games would still be going ahead, and those issues were still there. The games that people complain about were the Saturday night games, were the grand finals and things like that. They were still always there, and that's been a soccer ground for day one. The units were built after the actual ground was already there and well established. Johnny Warren actually played there. But I suppose the interesting thing for me is when you amend things on the run. I mean, the proposal was for netball courts and amenities block in Richard Murden Reserve. Had that original proposal gone ahead, it probably would have not had these impacts. And when you're actually dealing with infrastructure SEPs, which we look down on the state government for doing, well, that's what we used. We didn't go through a DA process. We went for an infrastructure SEP. So be aware that when we're critical of the state government and other government bodies using this process, same as when people use complying development, all those issues, we're critical on all those issues and we're critical of those processes. Well, here's the example where it was used, and the actual proposal was the review of the environmental factors was for netball courts and the amenities block at Richard Murden Reserve. It wasn't for basketball courts and the difference in the impact acoustically are quite considerable between the two. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
No more to say, Mr Mayor. It's just that I hope councillors all vote for this, and I hope the CEO moves on it as quick as possible.
Thanks, Chair. Councillors, I wrote to most of you after the last meeting following a discussion with the Deputy General Manager, Mr Warburton, and was able to clarify fairly quickly the concerns some of us had about the process, not the content, but the process. And I'm pleased that I was able to establish that we were quite within our rights to go ahead. Fortuitously, I think the time that's elapsed since then has allowed us to consider the issue more deeply of approving the full raft of suggested allocations as per the staff recommendations. And I've certainly come around to the view that given that people applied in good faith across the board, that we should honour that good faith proposal. And so I would move the original motion in full. And I think I'll leave it there, and if I need to pick anything up in my right of reply, I'll do it then. Thank you.
Yes. Just really briefly, just to say that I'm really pleased that we've got the opportunity to adopt the grants as I originally brought to council a couple of months ago, and that I originally proposed to council, for all the reasons why I think we discussed and debated some time ago. So thanks to Councillor Hesse for bringing this forward. Happy to second the motion.
Okay, further discussion, councillors?
Yep.
Councillor Passes?
I'll be voting against this. And I just want councillors, I think I'll repeat what I said the first time this came to council. Have a look at a motion further on in the agenda about a small local business in Summerhill that won an award out of all of Australia, not out of the inner west, not out of Sydney, not out of New South Wales, out of all Australia, that's had no help at all from council. And I also have a concern, and I'd like some answers from the officer. We have one application here to upgrade or repair his fire safety. So if his fire safety is not up to standard and he's operating, can I have some clarification on that? Because I've run small business, and I knew when I had to pay $5,000 a year for glass, because half the shop was glass insurance and everything else, I could not come to my council and get that money. So if we're going into now being entrepreneurs and supporting music and small business, I can go out and I know a lot of small businesses that wouldn't mind $20,000. That's why I'm totally opposed to this, and I'd like to get some answers. It doesn't have to be tonight, on is this place operating with the right fire standards?
We'll take that on notice. I understand that it's an upgrade of their existing premises, which is within code, but I will check that.
Thank you.
Question through the chair, if I could. In terms of the smaller $5,000 grants, I noticed a disproportionate number of LGBTQI grants were not approved. In fact, it seems to me that about $16,300 was requested by that particular community, but only $1,300 was allocated, which seems very small. So I'm going to put forward, first of all, I'll ask why that might be the case, if I could. Thank you.
put that question to the council officers.
Thanks, councillor. All the decisions were made on merit and tried to encourage all sections of our community, and some get there, some don't, but it was done on a merit process.
In light of that, Mr Mayor, if I could, thank you to the CEO. In light of that, Mr Mayor, I'd like to propose the following amendment, that the smaller grants for LGBTQI communities be reviewed before this is finalised. Thank you.
Well, I think it's pretty problematic. You've received advice that that sexuality was not a criteria that was considered by council officers. You've interpreted that a specific group has missed out on grants that are music grants, and are requiring that what you identify to be people of a particular sexual persuasion have their grants reviewed. It's problematic in a whole range of ways, including what it infers about, putting aside what it infers about the staff. I'm not sure that I can rule that in order. There's nothing in the Code of Meeting Practice or the Council's policy that allows us to award grants based on people's sexual preference.
Mr Mayor, I'm simply making sure that a group has not missed out. I'm not saying that council have not...
Okay, well, you provide that word into the minute take and I'll just consider the position. I just don't want to get us into trouble by resolving something that would be out of keeping with the Local Government Act and Anti-Discrimination Act. Councillors, further discussion? Councillor Macri.
Chair, I note that Councillor Hesse said he's been informed about the issues and they've all been explained to him, but shouldn't have come back in a report. So we all would have been privy to that information.
I'll take that as a question and come back to you. I'll put that to council officers.
Yep. And
is it required for this to have come back in a report as per the resolution?
A number of councillors who voted against the original resolution did seek some clarification and were able to provide that to them. Didn't provide any further new information that hadn't already been considered by councillors, but some did require some clarification. That's been done. So it's still the original report from council officers that is being considered as part of this motion.
Yes.
Following my discussion with Mr. Warburton, he's forwarded to all councillors the criteria we voted on in December last year, which was the basis of our concerns, and that was sent to all councillors to the best of my knowledge. So that information was provided to all councillors.
Yeah. Although that information was provided prior to the vote against the adoption of the grant, so hence the confusion from Councillor Macri.
Yeah. I can't support this for the simple reason that I can't prejudice one business against another. I mean, there's a lot of barbers out there that need $20,000 to upgrade their barber shops, and they're very artistic and creative people too.
You certainly are.
Many of my fellow compatriots on Marrickville Road and Illawarra Road, they could use a bit of a boost in venue, and that's right. That's right. But
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Macri has the floor.
Also, bear in mind what we're doing here. We are funding private businesses. They pay a cover charge. Our residents pay a cover charge to go in there. I mean, that's a bit of a problem if we're equitably distributing the rates that we get, particularly in a very tight budget. I struggle with that. I think that those businesses are doing quite well, and I know many of them are doing very, very well, and you can't get a beer there less than $10 in a lot of those places. So I just struggle with that, and I don't think it's a good look for council to get down this path, because it's a slippery slope when the next bunch of people come and say, well, I want this and I want that. I remember when the initial motion came up to investigate this, it was to seek state government funding for this, not council to provide the funding. So something has happened in between which hasn't been reported to us. And I think Councillor Passis and Councillor Hesse, you voted against it as well. Yeah, I think it was. in the original motion. But anyway, I can't support it in its current form, so I'll just stick to that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. There's no further discussion. I'll go to Councillor Hesse for, we'll deal with the Stamoulis amendment. No, it's already been seconded by Councillor York. Got an amendment from Councillor Stamoulis that Council review the smaller grants for LGBTQI for possible inclusion in the grants program. I'm going to rule it out of order on the basis that this is a music grants program, and there's no provision under our policies or the Local Government Act for us to award specific grants or review specific grants based on people's sexual preference. So happy to, if people want to dissent from that, happy to deal with that. I'm just trying to protect everyone, to be frank. Councillor Lockie.
I just wanted to speak briefly, just to reiterate some of the comments that I made in the last meeting in regards to using council monies to support private businesses. It was a question that I had as well, as I mentioned the last time we discussed this, as to whether this was appropriate. It didn't actually take a terrible amount of research to find out that actually, yes, this is something that governments do at all levels quite frequently when it comes to making decisions to stimulate particular parts of the economy that are deemed important for whatever reason, be it economic, be it to do with the character of an area, be it to do with the values. And I think in this particular case, these grants satisfy all of those criteria and more. And I would also like to thank Councillor Hesse for his attempts to work collegiately on this with all councillors to try and bring it back after what was admittedly a very messy debate last time around, and to the officers for working with us to provide all of the information that was asked for, which was really a case of re-providing the information that they had provided previously in most cases.
Briefly, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Councillors, I'm pleased that we're not in unanimity, that we have a significant amount of agreement around the table. And I think when it comes to supporting the creative community that we're all part of, I think this is something that where we should be working together as much as we can and listening not just to each other but to members of our community. I've certainly been contacted and indeed contacted quite a number of people after the last meeting, and I think people expect us to work together on this. To go to the criticisms of a couple of the councillors, the development of culture is, as Councillor Lockie just pointed out, something that every level of government does, more particularly if you look at the federal government. Historically, both the major parties to this day support the creative arts. They support film, they support television, they support radio, they support opera, classical music in many forms, literature, and I'm glad they do. They've been doing it for, I think, since the Prime Ministership of John Gorton and even before that. But particularly, of course, in the period of the Whitlam government, a really important part of the development of our culture, and one that I'm pleased. It was one of the things that excited me about politics, I've got to say. The development on the support for what you might call more popular culture, that is the non-classical forms of music and so on, has been something that's been more contentious. But I think if any local government area is one that's in touch with that part of our community, it's our inner west community. Many of my neighbours, not my immediate neighbours, but people live around the corner from me and the streets I live in, I'm sure many of you are the same, are musicians or people involved in the creative industries. This is the kind of support they need. It may surprise Councillor Passes to know that, of course, artists are workers as well, and they starve by and large. The information that Councillor Macri hears, I'm not sure where he got it from precisely, but I can assure him that the people who run these venues don't make a bucket of money. I'm not going to divulge private conversations, but this will be really important, not to put money in their pockets, but so those businesses can exist and provide the creative spaces for the amazing creative people who put on all different kinds of music and performance that excite, thrill, and stimulate us to be a better society and a better world. And I'm pleased that I believe we have a majority who will support that. Thank you.
we've got 10 items to go. One that we've jumped over, so 11 items to go. It's 8:30, so I'm going to try to seek people's cooperation in making sure that we stick to our newfound practice of getting the meetings completed by 10 p.m. at the latest. Councillor York.
Yeah, thank you. I will just speak very briefly because I have submitted an updated version of this motion to the version that's in the papers. Thank you, Councillor. Which simply notes the continued reports of serious accidents and near misses, notes the regular representations that I know several of the councillors around the table have continued to have from the community and residents in the local area. Note the officer's recommendation in the paper in our papers tonight that previous reviews of the crossing have informed the view that a signalised crossing and footpath widening is required, and then further note that council officers have made submissions to RMS for an upgrade and a submission for 2019 Black Spot grant funding, and then finally that council make representations from the Mayor to RMS and other relevant agencies to advocate for that funding. I'm not sure, I just wanted to take a moment to pause and share that update with councillors before we vote, and also to thank Lisa for speaking this evening and coming along to the meeting and making representations on behalf of the broader community, who I know continue to be very concerned about pedestrian safety in the context of a high demand pedestrian need for access to both the park and the childcare centre. I want to acknowledge previous councillors' efforts and staff efforts to try to resolve this issue. I'm not pretending that I've necessarily got a new answer, but I think given the continued concerns and the continued near misses that we all hear about, that shouldn't stop us making strong recommendations to the RMS and bringing this hopefully back up to the top of the list, because it's not acceptable that something that is known as a dangerous spot continues to be allowed to remain a dangerous spot until something dreadful again happens. So I hope councillors can support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hesse, do you wish to speak as seconder?
Very briefly, Councillor, look, I'd just like to thank Councillor York for bringing this to Council, and I apologise to members of the community for missing this. I actually take days off social media for the sake of my sanity. I'd like to also thank Councillor Macri for his advice, reminding me of when this matter came to Council, when he and I were on Council, on Mayoral Council 2004 to 2008, looking at the issue of speed humps, and that a resident there was complaining about the noise they made, therefore making the speed humps lower, which of course has the effect of potentially making traffic faster. I'd also like to acknowledge residents of Tempe who might be listening tonight, who were upset about the actions of council staff for putting more look carefully signs at that pedestrian crossing in the last couple of days.
Put your microphone on.
I think the important thing is that council staff, as I'm sure residents are aware, have very limited powers in this regard, and I think it's one of those things where council staff are doing their best within the limited powers that they have. I know it's not the answer that members of the community want, and I believe deserve. I know you have the support of myself as well here to have a signalised crossing. We need this. I've been down that road many times myself. It is a heavy trafficked road. It needs protection for pedestrians, and particularly, and I really felt for Lisa tonight. I could feel the emotion of if you get a near miss, and I've had a couple myself in the inner west over the years. It shakes you up, and I think particularly when you've got kids with you, it's doubly so. So I think it's time for the RMS to listen, and let's hopefully we can get everyone on board here tonight to apply a bit of pressure so the RMS knows that we're behind them. Thank you.
Councillor Passes.
Yes, this is very, very important, and I feel for the mothers and the people using it. I have a letter here tonight. Our CEO has written to the RMS about pedestrian safety in the inner west, and they've come back and they agree with us, and they are going to try and implement the 40-kilometre zones. They're well aware of the problems we have here, and I thank our CEO for contacting the RMS. I thank you for giving me a copy of this. It looks like things are getting done. I don't think there's any councillor that could vote against this. or even try to. Pedestrian safety is very important, and I think the RMS is on board just by this. So, not a problem.
Thank you,
Don't
Councillor
worry, we'll try to do something.
Thank you, Councillor Passos. I'll speak very briefly just to say that I consider this issue a personal priority for me as Mayor. I've just finished discussing it with the Chief Executive, and there will be the full weight of the organisation behind making sure that we get the right outcome on this, because there are people's lives at stake, and there is already one family that will never be able, whose lives will never be the same again because of the serious safety issues at this crossing. So I'm confident with that united front that we can get an outcome here. Does anyone wish to move an amendment? If not, Councillor York. Councillor York, no right of reply? I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 8, notice of motion, Heritage Conservation Areas, Lilyfield. Councillor Stamoulis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to the residents tonight who come to speak about this issue. And in fact, I think I'll leave it at that, because I think they spoke so well about the need for either a new heritage conservation area or expanding the current ones, whatever that might be. It is very clear, and I think our officers' comments are clear that some work is progressing in light of that. So I'll let the discussion continue. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. Councillors, discussion? Councillor York?
Just a question to the relevant officers about whether there are other areas in the LGA to which this issue applies, and whether there's been a prioritisation of how we would address those and what funding implications there might be if this involves a reprioritisation at all.
I'll put that to the Deputy General Manager.
Through the Chair, Councillors, there'll be a comprehensive heritage study undertaken as part of the LEP, and this would certainly form part of that.
Councillor York? I'll just speak very briefly to the matter. I'm certainly happy to support the recommendation. I had met probably more than 12 months ago with a group of residents who were concerned about the issue at the time of the demolition of the first of the two homes within this precinct that were lost, and explained at the time that certainly Leichhardt Council, and I'm sure Ashfield and Marrickville, had been opposed to the introduction of complying development legislation by the New South Wales Government for precisely this reason. Because in a complex area like ours with a whole range of different housing types, once you allow private certifiers or proponents to tick a box to identify that a planning proposal of any kind has been is justified, then you lose the sort of oversight that you need in order to protect heritage, but also, as we've seen in very recent days, to ensure that there's proper probity and oversight of certification. And so I understand that residents within this precinct would like to see this matter dealt with expeditiously. The problem is there are lots and lots of areas across the inner west in which there are serious and important heritage concerns where we want to also expand heritage zones. And the advice that we've received from council officers is that, according to them, now that's just the professional advice, not necessarily that of the views of the politicians, there's lots of places in Dulwich Hill, in Marrickville and elsewhere that may be even higher priorities than this precinct. And so it's difficult to get a council resolution which says we're going to spend $30,000 or $50,000 to just do this particular precinct in Balmain ward, in preference to all of the other places in the inner west that also want additional heritage protections. Now, as a Balmain ward councillor, I'd be very happy if we were able to expedite. I'm sure Councillor Stamoulis would feel the same, and Councillor Porteous, who's not in attendance. We all feel strongly that we'd like to prioritise the needs of residents in our wards, but we do have to take into account that we're here to represent the whole of the inner west. And so the very strong advice that we've received from officers is that we need to do all of these heritage zones as part of our LEP process. Now, that won't happen next week. It won't happen next month, but it is due to be finalised next year. Does that mean that I can guarantee you that there won't be another property demolished? No, can't do that. I didn't support the legislation that allowed it to happen. So you need to take that up with the State Member of Parliament or the Minister for Planning or the Premier, because I can guarantee you a majority of people in this room were openly opposed to that legislation when it came in. So I'm not giving you, I know I'm not giving you the answer that you want, but at least I'm being straight with you about how we can actually resolve this matter. And I'll give you one further commitment. I think Councillor Stamlis could have gone a little further. I'll give you a public commitment right now that I will specifically move to expand the parameters, the borders of this heritage conservation zone when the time comes for that to be considered and we've read the report. I'm very familiar with the issue. That's a commitment that I'll give, not pretending I can wave a wand and do it for you tomorrow. I'll get you the solution with the cooperation of other councillors when the matter actually comes to council. Councillors, further discussion. Councillor Passis?
Well, what you said is spot on. However, I'll stay right away from this as long as I can, and I can't see us opening up another can of worms. The Ashfield Heritage, the LEP 13, was absolutely horrendous. And this council has to take on board that if they're going to embark on any type of heritage listings or conservation areas, read the report from Shelley Penn and Helen Lardner from Victoria, national well-renowned heritage architects, and they were scathing of Ashfield Council's LEP 13. What happened to residents here in this area? And the whole move was not because these places should have had conservation placed on them or homes that were listed as heritage. There was no merit in half the properties. It was all to stop development. So people better be very, very careful. And contrary to what people think, people want to live in the inner west. And that's why councils are here, to have a look at development in the proper manner. You can't conserve and preserve something that the use-by date's up, or you've got a hot-pot street with all different type of dwellings. So I'm afraid to say councillors and residents should stop and think. Having heritage listings does not stop development. People do go to court, and what's involved, the municipality has to be very, very well informed on what's involved in heritage listings and conservation areas. Just look up the report of what they said about the Ashfield Council LEP. And people have still coming up to this council, meeting with the mayor and speaking to people because they want something done about it, because it went too far and it was all under the guise of stopping development or renovations, whatever.
Councillor Stamlis, you're right of reply.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I appreciate your commitment in terms of the Lilyfield conservation areas. But I do think it's a very positive step and a very positive process that our residents have finally come before council, residents from Lilyfield, to give us their thoughts and to give us their understanding of what they would like to see for the future of their area. And this process now commences tonight, and I'm very happy that Lilyfield now will be given very strong consideration for either expanding or creation of a new heritage conservation area. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, motions for Local Government New South Wales Conference from Councillor Hesse.
Chair, I'll briefly speak to these as a collective. Most of these motions, well, are all about having a seat at the table for local government with state and federal government to address some of the key issues that I think we all understand are both complex and conflictual and of importance to our community. I might even highlight item 4, which I want to say that the federal government has yesterday indeed said it wants to move forward with exactly this, actually create an Australian-based recycling industry, not before time. But I think given that local government is actually right at the cutting edges, that is, we collect the stuff, I think it's really important that local government and our representatives at the state and federal body have a seat at that table. So I hope councillors will support these, whether they disagree with any particular aspect of it or not, but simply refer them to the New South Wales Local Government Association for a discussion at the Local Government Conference. Thank you.
I'm happy to second it and support them on the basis that we don't debate them all. Some of they seem reasonably sensible, but we don't have time to go through them all. So I'll second that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Next item. Staff Commendation for Homelessness Program. It speaks for itself. I don't need to speak to it. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Stamoulis. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Councillor Passis, item 11, soapbox session prior to council meetings.
Yes, Mr Mayor, time and time again we've got certain councillors on this council that try to show up the mayor or this council that we don't permit people to speak. And I think, I believe we are a democracy and I think people have a right to speak. That's why I've put this motion up. But I've had a few discussions and I've decided a way to go could be that we have town hall meetings. See, what I would like, residents approach me all the time. They'd like to ask councillors why they vote the way they vote. They'd like an explanation and they don't want to wait for the election. I, for one, am quite willing to answer any question from residents, why I voted for or against something. I don't shy away from when I make my decisions. I don't hide. So I'm not opposed to that. So after speaking to the CEO, I believe we should have town hall meetings, maybe once every 2 months, and sort of a Q&A. Residents who are interested, they could make the council know that they want to attend these meetings. We advertise it in the proper manner so people know they're being held. We can hold one in Leichhardt, one in Marrickville, one in Ashfield, whatever. And I look forward to it because I look forward to a lot of councillors not being able to answer the questions they're asked. That's why I want it.
Okay, thank you for that. So can I just ask of the Chief Executive, Councillor Passis is withdrawing that motion. Can I ask you just to outline for councillors?
Something on the same lines.
Yeah. Outline for councillors what you are proposing through your discussions with her.
Thanks, Mayor and councillors. I think the original proposition from Councillor Passis was to have a soapbox forum prior to the formal council meetings here every fortnight. Given the time and demands, we suggested that perhaps it might be better to either combination of street corner meetings and or town hall forums, and I think Councillor Passis has preferred the town hall forum, which would be publicly advertised and for all councillors to be invited to be able to respond to citizens' concerns.
Yes.
The draw on staff resources will be an issue that we'll need to consider, particularly if people want to come and ask specific issues, you know, why is my tree not being dealt with, rather than policy things, but I'm sure we could work our way through that.
So you're agreeing to that request to get back to councillors with a response to that request?
That we can manage that.
You can manage it. Okay, excellent. So the motion is withdrawn. Thank Councillor Passis and the Chief Executive for working through that issue. I think it sounds like a really good opportunity for residents to be able to raise issues in a less political setting than the ordinary council meetings. Councillor Lockie. Well, if it's withdrawn, I'm not having everyone debate.
Oh, are we withdrawing or do we have a new motion in front of us to consider?
Councillor Passis?
Town hall meetings, yeah. I withdraw this one, but the same concept that every couple of months we have town hall meetings.
Oh, okay. It's been amended.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah.
Councillor Lockie.
Question first up through the chair. I think we considered something very similar to this as part of the local democracy initiatives that, and look, I can't for the life of me remember exactly when they were. It might have even been last year, where staff had proposed having meetings within each ward where staff would be present, where councillors would be present, and it would be an opportunity for residents to come and do pretty much exactly this, but with a more, I guess, thought through approach and structure and so forth. I honestly don't know at this point whether we actually did vote to introduce those or whether it somehow dropped. Do staff actually know?
I'll put that question to the officers. The Chief Executive certainly won't because he wasn't here at the time.
we'll take that on notice, I'm afraid.
Yeah, look, and I think that probably speaks to why, even with this amended motion, I would struggle to support it, because I just don't feel like I know enough about what it would actually involve, what structure it would be. I think would have a lot of questions about that. I don't actually have an issue with having the kinds of meetings that were proposed last time around. I think that's actually would have actually been quite a good opportunity for us to to meet with, to actually have the staff on hand discussing the specific projects and so forth that were active in a particular ward, as well as general staff who would be able to address the kinds of questions that would inevitably pop up at sessions like this, without it being, a bit of a free-for-all, which is, I think, possibly what could come out of this. And certainly the drain on staff time would be a real problem, or that we would have to consider, and I would definitely want more information about that before I could vote to support something like this. And that's, absolutely, I mean, I've spoken up many times in favour of having more resident input into council processes and so forth. I note that I think a lot of the time Councillor Passos actually voted against a lot of those initiatives for residents to have more input, more community groups, more resident precinct committees.
Just a moment, Councillor Lockie, I've got a point of order from Councillor Passos.
You mentioned my name.
I'll ask you to direct the point of order to me, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, could you please clarify the statement just made?
Well,
no, under the code of meeting practice,
it
says I have a right to have, when my name's been mentioned,
right.
the councillor to clarify what she just said.
Councillor Lockie, I'll ask you to clarify about the assertion that you've just made about Councillor Passos having voted against previous resolutions.
There's been a number of motions brought to council to reintroduce initiatives such as resident precinct committees, to make the local democracy groups so we have more input into council and more actual, if not power, then certainly more influence on those processes.
Point of order, Chair. The Councillor Lockie has the right to be heard in silence, I believe, and Councillor Passos is not allowing that. I'd ask you to call it to order.
This is not a precinct committee.
Point of order, Councillor Passos is breaching the Local Government Act by committing an act of disorder.
I am totally opposed to precincts, yes.
I will.
They've got nothing to do with this.
Call the meeting to order. Call the meeting to order now.
Sorry I couldn't vote for you for mayor. You're going to keep that animosity up for the whole 3 years?
Now,
and if you're successful next term,
Point of order, Mayor,
I won't vote for you again.
This is a definite breach of the...
Doing my best,
You just mind your own business.
Doing my best. Now, councillors, there's no audience in attendance. It's 9 o'clock. Councillor Lockie has the floor. We're voting on a motion that I thought would get through uncontroversially. I'm happy to adjourn the meeting for a couple of minutes if people can't bring themselves to order, but if not, I'll try one more time to go to Councillor Lockie to conclude her remarks.
Yeah, and look, that's pretty much a conclusion of the remarks, is that I would be happy to consider an initiative like this in future, but I would want more information about the structure of it, the implications for council operationally and how that would work, and what the benefit to residents would be. Obviously what we don't want is just to have residents turn up, take time out of their schedules, speak, and then to have that go no further. So I would actually like to know a bit more about the process around it as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll just speak briefly. I will come to Councillor Stamoulis and Councillor Hesse. Wish to speak in support of the motion. I do think, just to take up one point that Councillor Lockie made, I do think that this is similar to a proposal that was adopted by council previously, and I have no idea where that's got up to. There was going to be a rotating series of consultation events through different wards. That would, I presume, is with the engagement team. But if we supported that, I don't see the problem with supporting this. I would have felt that a soapbox section prior to the ordinary council meeting or as part of the ordinary council meeting would have been difficult to manage as chair. But Councillor Passos has liaised with the Chief Executive. He's acknowledged in front of all of us that this motion is achievable and he just needs a bit of time to have a look at it and get back to us about how it can be undertaken. I don't see the problem. And I might add further, I think one of the strengths that the new Chief Executive has demonstrated is an ability to get out into the community and meet with people when there is a problem. He said at the beginning of his tenure that he was going to get his hands dirty and actually get involved in issues, and that's certainly been my experience so far. And so I can see why this sort of forum under his jurisdiction could be successful. So I'm happy to second the motion. Councillor Stamoulis, then Councillor Hesse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, soapbox forums. I don't think anyone around here would sort of be a person that would get on their soapboxes. I could be wrong. But look, I think there's questions around how this is done well. Now, I know, I think Councillor Passis is definitely on the right track with getting out there, understanding what our residents want, reporting back to our residents, but it's how it occurs. And I think Councillor Lockie has opened up a number of those questions. It's got to be a forum that works well for our residents and works well for us. And so therefore, I would like to foreshadow that we work this out very well and think about the options available to us so that it becomes a highly effective session for councillors, for council staff, and also for our community. And I'm going to suggest that council investigate opportunities for, I'll use the term soapbox forums or for forums at town hall meetings across the LGA. So I'm going to foreshadow that. Very similar thing, but I would like to know what options would be best, most effective for council, what sort of information we might need, what our residents might need to hear from us, and really get a strong and effective exchange going. Whereabouts these might take place? Are they going to be at town halls? Are they going to be at specific town halls in wards? Are they going to be ward-based meetings? What is the best way that we can communicate with our residents and for them to communicate with us? So those options are important, and that's why I'm foreshadowing that instead. So it's basically along the lines of what the Passis-Byrne motion says, but we want to hear how it can be done well. Thanks.
I'm just going to have a look at that and get some advice. It seems to be identical to the primary motion, except for the removal of the word soapbox. So I'm not sure that I can accept a foreshadowed motion that doesn't differ in any substantive way at all from the primary motion. That would be an amendment to remove the word soapbox, I think. So, councillors, come on, let's get on with it. Like, I think people have worked out how they're voting on this one way or the other. Do we need to hear from everyone on this side of the chamber about it? Councillor Hesse was before you.
I'm happy to go. I'm happy with Councillor Steele actually as a motion, a foreshadowed motion. I'm happy to swap places with it if it helps the debate.
We've already got a foreshadowed motion.
Mine's a little different.
Won't get on the books if there's already... Anyway, Councillor Hesse, then Councillor Steele.
In essence, this may surprise Councillor Passis, actually supported her idea of it before meetings. And I'm less keen on the motion under the name of Passis and Byrne at the moment, not to be difficult, but for exactly the same reasons that Councillor Passis described. I think it ultimately becomes a political stunt at the so-called town hall meetings. And the reason we Greens have always been very keen on precinct meetings is because they're about engaging the community and doing something constructive. I think, frankly, a town hall meeting is likely to bring the council and councillors into further disrepute. Let's be brutally honest. People hate politics and hate politicians. I'm just being quite frank about it. And I think a place where you simply disagree with each other in public looks like an expensive opportunity to further lower the respect of this organisation in the eyes of the community. And that's not having a go at any individual at all. I think we have to think about this. I know Councillor Steer is going to foreshadow that we actually have a workshop on it. I'd support that because I support the idea of more democracy, more openness, but I don't think a stunt in a town hall, with all due respect, is actually going to assist any individual in this place or the council or make it more open. I offer that respectfully.
Okay, Councillor Steer.
Actually, I'll withdraw my foreshadowed motion because Councillor Stamoulis has encapsulated what I was going to propose in his amendment. So I'll go with him.
Can I just make a suggestion? I'm trying to do this in all seriousness. The only differences, yes, I'll come to you, Councillor De Cruz. The only difference between the Stamoulis foreshadowed motion and Councillor Pass's motion is that the Stamoulis motion would require a report back. The CEO has already said that he'd need to have a look into it and report back. There's no other substantive difference. So, Councillor Passes, are you willing to have a report back on this before we adopt it so that we know exactly how it's going to work?
I have enough faith in
So
the city
that's a no.
to find a venue and start.
Yep.
What's the report going to tell us?
Okay, that's a no. Any further discussion?
Oh, I think I
Oh, sorry, Councillor De Cruz.
Thank you. I actually think that one of the forums which we used to have was actually the what are called the local democracy groups. So that provided an opportunity for the community to present ideas to a group of people on a specific subject.
Councillor De Cruz has the floor.
So I actually support the Stamoulis alternative motion to investigate options, because I really do think that the advisory committees that the Leichhardt had before were very effective. I took LED lighting to the climate change task force. I took the naming of Douglas Grant Park to the Aboriginal committee. So I think that they're very effective forums. They allow people to progress a project they're interested in, and to actually get feedback from people who are interested in that particular subject matter. So I think that council investigate options for forums across the LGA and report back to council in September has my support.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Passes for her right of reply.
Okay. The whole reason this was being put up is because I'm sick and tired of residents coming up to me, asking me, why did certain councillors vote for this? Why did the Greens do this? Why did Labor do this? Why did you do this? Explain to me. I would like them to come up and ask us, personally to our faces, why we vote the way we vote. That was one of the main things. I said, why don't you ask them? So they've got a chance to come up and question councillors. And as I said, I don't have a problem telling people the way I vote. They can come up and give us some ideas what way they would like things to be done. It doesn't have to be all the officers there. If we don't have enough intelligence to be able to answer our residents with questions, what are we doing here? I just cannot believe it. This whole discussion, that side over there does nothing but go after the mayor every meeting when he says somebody cannot speak because they haven't put their name down. Oh, that's undemocratic, that's undemocratic. This is giving people a chance to come and ask questions in an informal venue, and if councillors can't control themselves, I'm supposed to be the one that can't. I'm not at all fussed. I'll face the whole municipality. I've got nothing to be afraid of, or one question to be afraid of. That's what I'm trying to say. A soapbox, they can get up and say, we don't like the way council picks our garbage up. We don't like the way council spends our money. We don't like the way council does this. Why did you vote that way when 2 years ago you voted that way? Open, transparent, democratic. If you're afraid to answer questions to the residents, don't vote for it. The same as you don't take calls if you don't know the number. Or when you do know the number and you don't want to talk to the resident, you ignore their calls. You people must understand I've been around a long time. You only have to look at my face. And I speak to a lot of people. So I said, I'm up to here. Let's have a soapbox session that the residents stop telling me, go and ask the councillors concerned.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll put the Passes Burn motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, we've got a primary motion from myself and Councillor Passos and myself to introduce opportunities for the public to speak to councillors, such as soapbox forums at town hall meetings across the LGA. If that's defeated, we've got a foreshadowed motion from Councillor Stamoulis, seconded by Councillor Hesse, that council investigate options for forums across the LGA and report back to council in September 2019. I'll put the primary motion. If that's defeated, we'll deal with the foreshadowed motion. All those in favour of the Passos-Byrne recommendation, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll use my casting vote. The motion has been carried. Next item. In fact, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. I'm buggered. I need a drink. Meeting is adjourned. Okay, shall we resume the meeting? The meeting is resumed. Councillors, we have 5 more motions to deal with before we go into Committee of the Whole. Item 12, Notice of Motion, Staff Positions. Councillor Passos.
Yes, councillors. I'm not real happy with the group manager's comments. I'm not asking what are the terms and conditions or the pay packets of our staff. I'm asking for reports from people that we resolved to engage on council. And as you can see what the motion says, it's the sports coordinator, the multicultural officer, Pride Centre Community Projects officer, all these people as well as Greenway. We've had no reports. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know, will we, when their time's up, re-employ them, have them work for us? They're not staff as such. They're a council resolution. So, and I do believe that councillors, we do have a right to know what they've been doing at the time they're spending here at council and being paid with ratepayers' money. There's nothing from them in our flyers that go out to the residents. There's nothing, there's no reports that comes to council. And I have a problem with that. They've been put there for a reason, and are they doing what they've been engaged to do? So I don't think we're questioned on what we're doing. So staff have to perform. Well, these people are like consultants to a certain degree. Well, consult with us. Tell us what you're doing, what you've achieved. It might help us in our role as councillors. We might know what our residents need or what they're happy with or not happy with. So the motion speaks for itself. And as I said, we've also got a domestic violence officer, I think, and a community liaison officer. They're all due to council resolutions. So to tell me councillors can be provided with a report, yes, on the terms and conditions and updates, I really don't want to know the terms and conditions. I want to know what they've done since they've been engaged. That's all.
Is there a seconder for the motion?
Councillor Passos, I wonder if you'd be happy just to amend some of the wording there. I'm not going to foreshadow. I'm not game enough to do that this time. But I think really what you're after is to understand these positions that have been created by council, that they're effective and what the job entails and that sort of thing. So I think maybe in two, to remove the words terms and conditions, which I think you said before that you're happy to do that anyway in point 2. So just to receive a report on the positions of West Connex Community Liaison Officer and the manager of the Greenway project, and also to receive a report on the Office of Sports Coordinator So it's basically one point saying that we receive a confidential report back on these 5 positions. Would that be happy to condense that? Would you be happy to condense that?
I'd just like to know
Yeah.
what you're doing up there.
Well, could we condense that down to just a... Yeah, okay.
As long as we
Thank
know
you.
what they're doing, and why haven't we been told or received anything from them in all this time?
Councillor Hesse.
Chair, I oppose this motion. I'll be very, very clear why. It's very clear that Councillor Passos has not supported any of these 5 positions. She was always opposed to them because she didn't like them. And frankly, if this council supports Councillor Passos's motion, we are setting a precedent for basically revisiting everything we've ever done. This is a waste of time, and I hope that we get on with the conversation. We hope we get on and vote with this and vote it down very, very quickly.
Any further discussion, councillors? If not, I'll go to Councillor Passos for a right of reply.
Maybe I didn't vote for them, for the very reason I'm asking the questions now. Because I don't think they're an asset to the council or for the residents. And don't vote for the motion. I'm not at all fussed. I'm being accountable to my ratepayers. These people have been engaged and they're being paid with ratepayers' money, and we don't know why. When I ring the CEO up and ask him something, I get information. When I ring Elizabeth up and ask her something, I know why she's getting paid and she gives me answers when I need to know something for the municipality. I do not know what these people are doing for the municipality and why they're getting paid. That's my whole point. If you don't want to vote against it, you are. This is a democracy. I am concerned enough to want to know what are these people doing and what's their role. Because I haven't seen anything in our leaflets from our ethnic liaison officer. I haven't seen anything from our sports officer. I haven't seen anything from any of the officers. So what are they doing up there?
Okay, so we've got the primary motion moved by Councillor Passer, seconded by Councillor Macri, with the Stamoulis amendments incorporated to make the report confidential. I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That has been defeated.
You don't want to know what you're doing with ratepayers' money.
Next item, item 13, notice of motion, council's newsletters and flyers. Councillor Passes.
Well, as the officer comment said here, this has been raised before. We are getting leaflets, very expensive flyers and leaflets, in our letterbox frequently. And what residents tell me, and from my own mind reading them, they're not really telling us anything apart from when the next festival or Edge is on. They're not telling the residents and the newcomers how to dispose of their garbage to stop the vermin. I would say in the last week, I get up very early and go and buy the papers, and all I see running across the roads are rats. Rats everywhere. Because people are not understanding, newcomers, how to dispose of their rubbish. We're not telling people to wash their cars on grass. We're not telling people all little things that can help them about trees. We're not telling people to trim their branches that are overhanging footpaths, and people cannot walk along the footpath. They have to go out on the street. We're not telling them housekeeping things that council's on about. All we're telling them about is how to go and have a good time at a festival. There are a lot of things that they need to know. We're not reminding people that if they've been in the municipality over a certain time, they can have a pension or rate rebate. We are not giving people an update on the biggest project in Ashfield or the LGA, the swimming pool. We are not giving them updates on what we're doing with public facilities. How long are they going to take, when they'll be finished, and what's the next on the agenda. We are not telling them basics, which they looked. We're not giving them updates on numbers and services. That's what should be in the flyers. Not festivals and artists. Not everybody wants to go to a festival, and not everybody wants to go to art galleries. Not the municipality that I represent. If your people are more that way inclined, fair enough. Maybe the flyers have to address each demographic differently. But I know what the people ask me. And I believe councillors are closer to the residents, and we should have input in what goes out in the flyers, because we know what the people are asking us.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Rossini. Anyone wish to speak to the motion?
Just a quick question. I think the question here is about the effectiveness of the quarterly newsletter to some degree. In our customer satisfaction survey, do we actually ask that question about the quarterly newsletter itself, and is this a valid and useful form of communication? Thank you.
I believe we do.
This is straightforward. There is an equal access playground down in Hawthorn Parade where a lot of families take children with disabilities, special needs children, and it is not, because of the success of the light rail, the motion speaks for itself. The parking right in front of the playground is always parked out. And I do believe that this should be a 2-hour parking. Parents don't stay much longer than that, maybe even less, when they take their children down to the playground. And all I'm asking is that a 2-hour parking signs be put in.
It's a sensible investigation. I'm going to second it. I presume there's no one who wishes to speak against this. I'll put the passes burn recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 15, notice of motion. Congratulations to Lucy Florist.
Again, it speaks for itself. And again, I mentioned this earlier when we giving financial help to
The businesses. I don't think councillors understand how important and what a fantastic award this is. This is a woman that works 7 days a week, is up early, very early going to the markets. She's very well known in the Summerhill area and the wider inner west. And I really do think she deserves to be recognised in the way that I have mentioned here, with a letter from council congratulating her, and maybe on some very, very nice paper that she could have laminated.
Yep.
Lucy is of Asian background, worked very hard, also with a very sick husband that's in the shop, supposed to be helping her, but I think he's given her more trouble than anything else. But, and I'd like to remind councillors that the former mayor of this council, Councillor Lou Herman, that was mayor for I don't know how many years, he went there every Friday afternoon to buy flowers for his wife.
Oh.
It was all, I don't know why, I don't trust men that buy flowers. Might be they've done something wrong. I used to say that to her. I say, Lou, something's going on. But doesn't matter. I really do believe she should be congratulated. And it would be lovely if councillors contacted Lucy's Forest and gave her personal congratulations. This is what hard work does, and not asking for handouts.
Well, I'm certainly...
Seconded by Councillor Rosidi.
Councillor Rosidi will second the motion. I think it's a very good one, and I think it's the sort of thing that should go in the council newsletter. And I'll be personally hand-delivering my letter of congratulations on behalf of the council.
Have a photo with her.
Happy to do so. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the motion? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 16, notice of motion, council's responsibility to residents amenity. Councillor Passis.
Yes, well, I am getting phone calls from people that live on the North Shore. One of the guys comes over to the Orange Grove markets. I've never been to them, but apparently they're very successful. And he brings people from overseas. And he said, they're the first place I take my friends and visitors from overseas. He said, Julie, what is happening with the inner west? He said, it's covered in socialist posters, political things. I will go as far as saying Mr. Albanese is still up there. And also the last Liberal candidate is still up there. It's bad enough at least one that's up there that won, but the loser still being up there is very embarrassing. So I cannot understand why our guys that are out on the roads 24/7 are not cleaning these posters off. Again, I cannot agree with the officer's comments here. I would travel from the north side of Ashfield over to the shopping centre every day. And to be told that the posters are removed every day is simply not true. It is not true. And all you have to do is go to the corner of Liverpool Road and Holden Street, the exit from this car park, and have a look at the posters on the Energy Australia boxes, on the poles. Okay, turn around and tell me it's Energy Australia's responsibility. To a certain extent it is, but while we're there, it is our municipality. Clean them off. Half of them are half pulled off. It's absolutely ugly and horrible. We must address these things. Why are we putting in garden beds and spending so much money on garden beds on every corner? And the place just looks grotty. Why have we spent millions on the upgrade opposite Ashfield Station? Why? When it looks like a back street in Thailand. So honestly, something has to be done about this. We have to really get proactive, as with the graffiti.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Rosidi. Does anyone wish to speak to it? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? All those against? That is 6-all. I'll use my casting vote for the motion to be... Oh, where's Councillor Kiat? Yeah, that's 6-all. I'll use my casting vote to carry the motion. That has been carried. Next item, free Wi-Fi. Councillor Stamoulis.
This is simply asking for a report back on our Wi-Fi program, but I will put the question right now to the relevant officer. Have there been any recent changes to our policy in regard to Wi-Fi or any that might be forthcoming? Thank you.
I'll put that question to the council officers.
Sorry, I was just trying to attend to a matter with Councillor
Could you repeat your question, Councillor Stamoulis?
As I said here, I'm just asking for a statement back about our Wi-Fi policy. We adopted it in certain town centres, Balmain, Roselle, probably Dulwich Hill and Ashfield and that. So I would be nice to know what the status of that is, but have there been any recent changes that you might know of in the Wi-Fi policy or anything forthcoming that you could tell us about? Thank you.
I'll put that question to the Chief Executive.
Thanks, Councillor. I'm not aware of any changes recently, and we'll provide a report back on the detail.
Thank you. I'm happy to second the Stamoulis motion. Anyone wish to speak against it? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour?
I'm voting against it.
Okay. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against? Councillor Passis is against. That has been carried. That's been carried. Next item. Item 18, Ashfield Pool update.
Oh, yes.
Councillors.
I'm going to go off on this one.
Does anyone wish to move the recommendation? Councillor McKenna will. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor? No. Item 18, Ashfield Pool update. So no discussion?
I do.
Right, Councillor Passis.
I would like to ask the General Manager, the CEO,
Yep.
whatever, who is our project manager for the Ashfield Pool?
I'll put that question to the Chief Executive.
We have a private sector project manager, reports to a project control group, which Elizabeth Richardson chairs.
No, but council must have a project manager.
Yeah, we have
that
an internal
oversees
project manager, but we've...
But who is the
engaged someone-
council's one?
Hold on. I'll just allow the Chief Executive to answer the question. Or the Deputy General Manager.
Through the chair, councillors, you went to tender, so council explicitly resolved to go out to tender to find dedicated project managers and a project director in the council to manage the Aquatic Centre project because of the skills and expertise that it required. That set of contractors report through on a day-to-day operational level through to Brooke Martin, the Group Manager of Major Projects, who are ultimately accountable to the project control group that I chair.
Look, I tell you why I'm asking this. I'm not here to make trouble. I am here for accountability and things to be done in the proper manner so we don't get left with egg on our face. And we lose millions and millions of ratepayers' money. I brought up here tonight, I don't know if councillors are well aware of it, Oh, there might be one councillor on this council that's still aware of it. The Ernst and Young report on the Civic Centre. This report was scathing of the project. And I am telling you, what's been happening with the swimming pool is exactly the same, and this has not been taken on board, the recommendations of Ernst and Young. And I have a big problem with that. We sold to the Civic Centre $12 million it was going to be. It ended up 22. It's substandard and it's not finished. 19. It's not finished. I've got all the paperwork at home. You all know about my garage and the paperwork.
Okay, councillor.
It's still not finished. Now, I am afraid that the swimming pool is going to go down the same track. I will tell you the points that they've made here. The Ernst & Young report contains findings that point to significant deficiencies in Council's planning and execution. I am particularly concerned about the following issues: the lack of defined governance framework, limited internal experience and expertise in project management, a failure to prepare a formal project management plan, a lack of formal procurement strategy, a failure to consider project risks, a failure to assess consultants' performance against predefined standards, inability to provide consistent, accurate and timely data, inadequacy of the project manager's reports. We haven't got one. We haven't got one. And what he finishes off with in the end, accordingly, I seek your confirmation that Council will ensure that the recommendations of the Ernst & Young report are implemented so that the shortfall does not impact on ratepayers, and in particular that it will not lead to a reduction in the standard of service provided to ratepayers. I am not accusing this term of council of that happening, but I'm starting to see it happen. Because that report I got on the swimming pool, I have to say, was a Mickey Mouse report. It had a couple of colours on it and half a dozen words. I'm not going to go through this again. It's wrong. We are talking, that's why I was so upset last week when everyone said it went up 40 million.
Councillor, your time has expired. I'm going to ask the Chief, I must say I also had some difficulty reading the report. I'm going to ask the Chief Executive to provide a verbal update to supplement the written report that we've received.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Councillor. Councillor, all the recommendations made by Ernst & Young in that report about the Civic Centre have been adopted and accepted and implemented on the Ashfield pool job.
Where's the timely report?
Chief Executive has the...
What I've been trying to do is get an IT system to get working properly to get those reports done. Still not quite there, which is frustrating. And the different reporting formats has been part of the problem. There is also on the council website a report on the Ashfield pool provided, so it's available to councillors and to the community. We're just trying to fine-tune the reporting to get those things right, but we're currently on budget and on program.
Yeah, that needs to go out to the people in the leaflets that we keep sending out.
Well, it's currently on the website, but...
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Now, Chief Executive's provided that verbal update. Yep. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the matter, to the report? If not, Councillor McKenna has moved the adoption of the receiver note. I'm happy to second that. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. With Councillor Passis against. Now, councillors, we need to go into committee of the whole, confidential session. Councillor Kiat will move that we go into confidential session. I will second that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. I'll ask the officers to clear the chamber, please.
Can I move a procedural motion with respect to item 3? I just think it'll be easier